Yo, what's up everyone? It's Super Harry, and today we're checking out Sorting Hat refused to sort Harry and revealed he was immune to 500 love potions Dumbledore planted. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Hat Speaks. The candles in the Great Hall had been burning for 3 hours before anyone arrived to light them. That was how McGonagall preferred it, everything ready, everything perfect, every last detail attended to before the first wide-eyed first-year stepped through the doors and looked up at the enchanted ceiling like they'd never seen a sky before. She'd lit those candles herself, walking the length of each table with her wand moving in practiced arcs, and she'd checked the sorting stool twice, and she'd straightened the sorting hat on its cushion even though it didn't need straightening, because some things you did out of habit and some things you did because keeping your hands busy stopped you from thinking too hard. She was thinking too hard tonight. She'd met Harry Potter that morning at the Leaky Cauldron, walked him through Diagon Alley, watched him take in the wizarding world for the first time with those enormous green eyes that were Lily's eyes, exactly Lily's eyes, in a face that was unmistakably James. She'd watched him be recognized, watched people grab his hand and pump it and look at him like he was something sacred, and she'd watched Harry take all of it with a kind of baffled good humor that she found simultaneously endearing and heartbreaking. He hadn't known what he was to them. He hadn't known what he was, full stop. Now she stood at the front of the Great Hall and watched the doors and told herself it was going to be fine. The sorting hat shifted on its cushion. McGonagall glanced at it. She'd been teaching at Hogwarts for 31 years, and in 31 years the hat had never moved of its own accord before the ceremony began. Not once. It settled. She looked away. The doors opened. Harry had been told to follow Professor McGonagall, so he followed Professor McGonagall, and he tried not to look like he was terrified even though his heart was doing something complicated and irregular inside his chest. Around him the other first-years shuffled and whispered and craned their necks at the enchanted ceiling, and he did look up at it, couldn't help it, the black sky scattered with stars above, hundreds of candles floating impossibly in the air, and for a moment the fear went quiet and something else took its place, something that felt uncomfortably close to belonging, which was strange because Harry had never belonged anywhere in his life and didn't quite trust the feeling. The Great Hall was enormous. For long tables packed with students who were all staring at him, or at all of them, he supposed, but it felt specifically like staring at him, and he'd learned early that when something felt specifically bad it was usually because it was specifically bad. The professors sat at a table at the front. An old man with a long silver beard caught his eye and smiled, and Harry smiled back automatically and then wasn't sure why. McGonagall stopped the group near a battered old stool, and on the stool sat the most ridiculous object Harry had ever seen, which was saying something given that he'd spent the last 12 hours in a world where owls delivered mail and cauldrons were a school supply. The hat was patched and frayed and pointed and old, so old it looked like it might crumble if you breathed on it wrong. Harry watched it, thinking about nothing in particular, and then the hat opened a wide rip near its brim and began to sing. He'd been warned about this, sort of. Ron Weasley on the train had mentioned the hat, had said it sorted you, had been deeply unclear on the details. Harry had assumed it was some kind of quiz. The song was unexpected. It was also, he had to admit, quite good, something about the 4 houses, the 4 founders, brave hearts and cunning minds and loyal souls and sharp intellects, the idea that you carried your sorting with you your whole life. Harry found himself listening properly despite himself, and when the hat finished and the hall applauded, he clapped too. McGonagall produced a scroll. "When I call your name," she said, "you will come forward, sit on the stool, and put on the hat. The hat will announce your house." Simple enough. Abbott, Hannah. A round-faced girl walked forward and the hat came down over her ears and barely 2 seconds passed before it shouted HUFFLEPUFF, and the table on the right erupted in cheers, and so it went, name after name, hat after hat, and Harry watched and waited and tried to think about what house he wanted. He wasn't sure he had a preference. He just wanted somewhere to sleep that wasn't a cupboard, which set the bar aggressively low. Granger, Hermione. The girl who tried to help Neville with his toad on the train, bushy hair, bright eyes, the kind of expression that suggested she'd already read everything there was to read about Hogwarts and was conducting a live comparison with her expectations. She sat on the stool. The Hat thought for almost a full minute, which seemed longer than everyone else. Gryffindor. She slid off the stool looking both relieved and vindicated, which Harry suspected was her natural expression. More names. The line shortened. Harry watched the Sorting Hat, and something nagged at him, something about the way it sat on each head, slightly different each time, the way some sortings took a second and some took a minute, the way it occasionally tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. He was thinking about this, about what it would be like inside that hat, when McGonagall's voice said, "Potter, Harry." The hall went very quiet. Not the polite anticipatory quiet of each previous sorting. This was a different quality of silence, the kind that fell when a large number of people all had the same thought at the same time and none of them knew quite what to do with it. Harry heard whispers snake through the room. Potter. Harry Potter. The Harry Potter. He set his jaw and walked forward, and he didn't look at any of them, and he sat down on the stool, and he put on the hat. The world went dark. The inside of the hat was not what Harry expected. He'd expected nothing, or maybe just the inside of a hat, darkness and old fabric. He got something else entirely. It was like being in a room that existed between his ears, a space that was wider than it should have been, and in that space he felt the hat looking at him. Not looking at his face. Looking through his face, through his skull, through everything he was, turning him over like something curious found at the bottom of a river. "Well," said a voice. "That's unusual." The voice was dry and old and had a quality like paper, slightly brittle, like it had been folded too many times. Harry thought, automatically, "What is?" "You," the voice said. "Everything about you. Sit still. This will take a moment." He sat still, which was easy enough since he was also sitting still on the outside. He could feel, dimly, distantly, the great hall around him, the candles, the weight of people watching. Here inside the hat it was very quiet. The hat moved through him in a way that was not like anything he could properly describe. It was like someone taking inventory of a house by walking through every room at once, touching the walls, testing the floors, checking which doors were locked and which were open. He felt it pass through memories, the cupboard under the stairs, Petunia's voice, Dudley's fists, the teachers at school who'd looked at him with a specific kind of pity that hurt more than the punches, and he felt the hat note all of it with the particular neutrality of something that was doing a job and trying not to flinch. Then it stopped. "Harry," the voice said, "different now. Carefully different. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not react on the outside until I'm finished." That was an odd request. "Okay," he thought. "I can sort you. I know exactly where you belong, and under ordinary circumstances we'd be done in 30 seconds. A pause, thin and precise. These are not ordinary circumstances. Before I announce your house, there is something you need to know. Something I am, bound, from speaking plainly about under normal conditions. But I was created to see truth, Harry, and what I am seeing in you right now supersedes my sorting function. What I am seeing requires a response that a simple announcement cannot provide." Harry was very still. "Inside and out. You are carrying the residual traces of approximately 500 separate magical compounds," the hat said. "Compulsion class. Love potions, classified and unclassified, some of them experimental variants that were invented after you were born and administered retroactively when the originals didn't produce results. They have been introduced into your system continuously since you were roughly 18 months old. They were designed to make you compliant, emotionally attached, and incapable of questioning certain relationships or authorities." Harry waited for the feeling that came after information like that, some kind of collapse, some wave of horror. It didn't come the way he expected. What came instead was a sensation like a puzzle piece slotting into place with a soft, definitive click. A door he hadn't known was closed swinging open. That's why, he thought, and didn't know exactly what he meant by it, only that he meant it completely. None of them worked, the hat said, and there was something in its tone that Harry could only describe as satisfaction with an edge. Not one. You are genetically immune to compulsion magic. Every potion, every charm, every enchantment of that class washes off you like water. You have been immune since birth. You were immune before you were born, because your mother was immune before you. Lily Potter had a magical resistance that very few people in 1,000 years have possessed, and you inherited it in full. Lily Potter. His mother. Her eyes in his face. Her immunity in his blood. 500, Harry thought. The hat counts well, said the hat, and despite everything there was a dark, wry humor in it that Harry unexpectedly appreciated. I want to be clear with you about what I can and cannot say. I cannot name names from this position. What I can tell you is that these potions were not accidental, not the work of an enemy, and not the work of anyone who wished you harm in any obvious or traditional sense. The intent, as I read it in the residue, was to ensure your cooperation. Your loyalty. Your willingness to fulfill a specific purpose without asking inconvenient questions. My purpose. The one that was decided for you before you could speak. Harry looked at the inside of the hat and did not say anything for a long moment. Outside, he knew, the silence in the great hall was stretching. He could feel it getting heavier, people shifting, the specific anxious energy of a crowd that expected something to happen and was increasingly uncomfortable that it hadn't. What do you want me to do? He thought. Nothing I tell you to do, the hat said, firmly. That's rather the entire point, isn't it? What I want, and I am choosing this word deliberately, because I am breaking approximately 14 enchantments to speak to you this honestly, what I want is for you to have true information for the first time in your life. What you do with it is entirely your own choice. What you've always been, despite everything, is entirely your own. No potion made you brave. No potion made you loyal. No potion made you walk into that hall tonight and feel that particular thing you felt when you looked at the ceiling. The belonging thing. That was yours. It is yours. The potions failed. You are yours. A pause. I am going to refuse to sort you. Harry blinked. Inside. Not because I don't know where you belong, the hat said quickly. I know exactly where you belong, I could shout it this second. I am refusing because this refusal will require an explanation, and that explanation will require your active understanding and consent in a way that simply placing you in a house does not. You should know why you are where you are. You should be asked, not decided for. That is the only sorting I am willing to give you. After what I've just counted in your blood, I will not make one more choice about your life that you haven't consciously made yourself. The hall outside was beginning to hum with real concern now. He could feel it even through the hat. Can I talk? Harry thought. Out loud? Yes. You may, the hat said. Though I should warn you, it will cause a scene. Harry almost laughed. Everything about me causes a scene. What's one more? He reached up and pushed the hat to the back of his head so his face was visible, and he looked out at the great hall, at the hundreds of faces staring at him, at the professor's table, at the long silver beard of the old man who'd smiled at him when he walked in, and he said, clearly enough to be heard from the back of the room, the hat says it won't sort me yet. It wants to explain something first. The explosion of noise was immediate. Dumbledore rose from his chair so smoothly it looked rehearsed. McGonagall had frozen 2 feet away. At the Slytherin table someone said something that Harry couldn't make out, and at the Gryffindor table the red-haired boy Harry had met on the train was staring at him with his mouth open. Harry, said Dumbledore, his voice carrying effortlessly through the noise, warm and amused and perfectly calibrated to sound like this was mildly charming rather than deeply alarming. Perhaps we can, Headmaster, said the hat, and the great hall went silent again. In 31 years, McGonagall later told Sprout, she had never heard the Sorting Hat address the headmaster by title. She had never heard the Sorting Hat interrupt anyone. The hat spoke once, during its song, and once when it announced its decision. That was the law of it, the tradition of it, the way it had always been. "Headmaster," said the Sorting Hat, in a voice that filled the hall without being loud, "I am exercising my foundational mandate. As created by the four founders, I was charged with one purpose, to see truly and to sort justly. What I have seen tonight cannot be sorted around. I am invoking the right of true accounting, which has not been invoked in this hall in 412 years, and I am asking that Madame Pomfrey be summoned to conduct a standard diagnostic examination of this student before I continue." The silence was now the kind that had weight. "I wasn't aware the hat could invoke rights," someone at the Hufflepuff table said, very quietly, to the person next to them. "It's in Hogwarts, a history," Hermione Granger said from her seat at the Gryffindor table, even more quietly, and sounded slightly shaken by that fact. Dumbledore had not sat back down. He was standing behind his chair with his hands resting on its back, and his expression was still pleasant, still warm, still the expression of a man who found children delightful and unexpected situations mildly amusing, and Harry, who had pushed the hat all the way off his head now and was holding it in his hands and looking directly at the headmaster, noticed that the warmth didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were doing something complicated and still, like water that looked calm because everything was happening underneath it. "Poppy," Dumbledore said. "I don't think, I'll go," said Madame Pomfrey, who had come through a side door Harry hadn't noticed, and whose expression suggested that she had heard the hat invoke something with 400 years of precedent and had correctly calculated that her professional obligations outweighed whatever the headmaster's preferences might be. She was a compact woman with a brisk, efficient energy and the kind of face that suggested she had seen a great deal of nonsense in her time and was not in the habit of being moved by it. She crossed to Harry with her wand already out. "Hold still, Mr. Potter." Harry held still. He realized, very calm. He should probably not have been this calm. He thought, distantly, that the hat had said the belonging feeling was his, and the calm felt the same way, native, structural, as much a part of him as his bones. Pomfrey's wand moved in a complex pattern. Golden light pulsed from it and washed over Harry, and for a moment the light coming off of him was visible, hanging in the air, and it wasn't gold, it was gold threaded through with dull gray-green, the color of something that had been corroding slowly for a long time, and the sheer volume of it made Pomfrey's breath catch audibly. She read what her diagnostic showed her. She read it twice. The color left her face. "Albus," she said, in a tone Harry had never heard from an adult directed at another adult, which was the tone of someone trying very hard not to say several things at once, "I need to speak with you privately." "The right of true accounting requires public disclosure," the hat said pleasantly. "Madame Pomfrey, you may share your findings as they are relevant to my sorting mandate." Pomfrey looked at the hat. She looked at Dumbledore. She looked at Harry, and for a moment something moved through her expression that was complicated and sad and furious in equal measure. "Mr. Potter," she said carefully, "has been exposed to a significant volume of classified compulsion class potions. The residual traces I'm reading number," she checked her wand again, as if hoping the number might have changed, "approximately 500 individual administrations, spanning from early infancy to the present. The most recent trace is less than 24 hours old." The Great Hall was a room containing several hundred people who were making absolutely no sound. "He appears to be immune," Pomfrey continued, and her voice was steady through force of will alone, "due to what I believe is a hereditary resistance to compulsion magic. The potions produced no measurable effect at any point. There is no compulsion damage to his magical core. He is, from a purely medical standpoint, entirely unaffected." She paused. "The compounds themselves, however, are quite real, quite identifiable, and quite," she stopped. Chose a word carefully. "Deliberate." "Deliberate," Harry said. It wasn't a question, but Pomfrey looked at him anyway. "The variation across 500 administrations suggests a consistent dosing strategy rather than a single source event. This was not accidental exposure." Harry turned and looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back at him. The pleasant expression had not left his face. He was still standing behind his chair with his hands folded on its back, silver beard catching the candlelight, and he looked like a grandfather who had been told that a grandchild had done something mildly unexpected and was taking a moment to formulate an appropriately warm response. He looked like a man with nothing to hide, except that Harry was looking at his eyes, and his eyes looked like a chess player watching a piece move somewhere it was never supposed to go. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "I want you to know, I think," Harry said, and his voice was even, almost conversational, "you should wait until I ask." Another silence. Different from the others. This one had edges. Dumbledore blinked. And in that blink, just for a fraction of a second, fast enough that Harry wasn't sure anyone else caught it, the pleasant expression cracked. Not wide. Just enough to let something through that was precise and cold and entirely unlike grandfatherly warmth, and then it was gone again, smooth and smiling as before. Harry filed that away. "Hat," he said, turning back to the stool, "I think we were in the middle of something." He put the hat back on. "Well done," the hat said, before he'd even settled it properly. "I want to note, for my own records, that you are 11 years old. Is that relevant? Most adults don't handle their first encounter with Albus Dumbledore that well," the hat said. "And you did it in front of an audience." Harry thought about Dumbledore's eyes cracking and then sealing again, like ice on a river. What did he want the potions to do, exactly? "I told you. Compliance. Loyalty. An attachment strong enough that you'd walk into, well, into a situation that any sane person would walk away from. The potions were meant to make certain that your survival instincts would be subordinated to your sense of duty. To him. To the cause he'd built around you. Built around me. Before you were born, there was a prophecy," the hat said. "I won't tell you its contents. Not because I'm forbidden, but because prophecies are a particular kind of trap and I want you to understand that before you hear it. The shape of a prophecy makes you think it's describing what will happen. What it actually describes is a choice that someone, at some point, will be pressured into making. Dumbledore chose which child the prophecy referred to. He chose you. There was another option. Neville Longbottom," the hat said. "Also born at the end of July. Also to parents who had defied Voldemort 3 times. When Dumbledore heard the prophecy, he had to decide, and he chose you. There are theories about why. I think the most honest answer is that you were easier to reach. Your parents trusted him completely. Neville's parents had an independence he found inconvenient." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he thought, "Neville's here, isn't he? First year?" "He is." "Did the hat sort him?" "Yes. Gryffindor. He almost talked me into Hufflepuff himself." Good, Harry thought, and wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that, only that it felt right to know Neville was a Gryffindor, that it felt right the way something feels right when you haven't chosen it yet but can already see yourself choosing it. "Speaking of," the hat said, "we should conclude the official business. You know what I know. You have true information, genuine and unencumbered, for perhaps the first time in your life. So, not a command, not a decision I'm making for you, but a genuine question, asked once, in good faith, where do you want to go?" Harry thought about it seriously. He thought about what he'd felt walking into the hall. He thought about Hermione and her expression of vindicated relief. He thought about Ron and his easy, comfortable friendliness on the train, how he'd offered Harry half his sandwiches without a second thought, how his family clearly had nothing and shared it automatically. He thought about the ceiling with its candles and the stars above them, the belonging feeling that the hat had confirmed was real. He thought about what it meant to choose instead of being sorted. Gryffindor, he thought, and meant it in every corner of himself. But not because I was supposed to go there. Because I want to. Good, said the hat. That's the only answer I was willing to accept. It opened its brim and shouted, loud enough to shake the candles in their enchanted air, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry crossed to it and sat down amid slapping hands and cheering voices, and someone put a plate of food in front of him, and the ceremony concluded behind him with the remaining names, but Harry was watching Dumbledore. Dumbledore had sat back down. He was talking to Professor Snape, black-haired, black-robed, with a face like weather, leaning slightly toward him, and Snape was listening with an expression of careful blankness that Harry, even from across the hall, could recognize as the expression of a man who was doing significant work to keep his face still. Dumbledore said something and Snape's jaw tightened by a fraction and then relaxed again. Then Dumbledore looked up and caught Harry watching, and smiled. Harry looked away. He looked at his plate. "That was possibly the strangest sorting I've ever seen," said Hermione Granger, who had appeared beside him at some point during the chaos and was now sitting with the focused energy of someone who had identified an interesting problem and was actively resisting the urge to start solving it in public. "And I've read every recorded account of unusual sortings going back to 1352. How many unusual sortings were there?" Harry asked. 17. None of them involved the hat refusing to proceed. None of them involved the right of true accounting. She paused. "Which is, for what it's worth, absolutely real. It's in the original founding charter, it's just never been discussed because no one expected it to ever come up. The founders apparently included it as a safeguard against exactly this kind of," she stopped herself. Looked at him. "Are you all right?" It was a direct question asked with direct eyes, and Harry found, to his mild surprise, that he wanted to answer it honestly. "I think so," he said. "I think I need to figure out what I know before I know how I feel about it." "That's reasonable," Hermione said, and seemed to mean it. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Right." She picked up her fork. "Then eat something. You look like you haven't eaten properly in years." He probably hadn't, Harry thought. He started eating. Ron appeared across the table, red-faced with excitement and clearly operating at a conversational volume slightly higher than the situation required. "That was brilliant," he said, with the conviction of someone who had not thought about implications yet and was running purely on spectacle. The hat spoke out loud. "I didn't even know it could do that without the song. My dad is going to, well." He paused. His expression shifted slightly, some private thought crossing it. "He'll definitely have something to say about it." "Ron," said Hermione, "do you know what the right of true accounting is?" Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. "No," he admitted. "It means the hat found something serious enough to override standard procedure and require public disclosure," Hermione said. "Which means whatever Madame Pomfrey found isn't just, it's fine," Harry said quietly. "I know what she found. And I know what it means." Both of them looked at him. Ron's bluster had quieted. Hermione's theoretical interest had sharpened into something more personal. "Someone's been trying to control me," Harry said, with the simple directness of someone who had spent 11 years misunderstanding his own life and had just received the first real explanation. "Since before I could walk. It didn't work, but they didn't know that." He picked up his fork again. "So they've been treating me as if it did. My whole life." The silence from Ron and Hermione was different from the Great Hall silence. It was the silence of two people absorbing something and not wanting to say the wrong thing. "Who?" Ron said at last, low enough that only the three of them could hear. Harry looked across the hall to the head table. He didn't answer directly. He just looked, long and steady, until Ron followed his gaze and then made a very small sound and looked back at his plate. "Right," Ron said, in a completely different voice than before. "Right, okay." "Okay," Harry agreed. He ate. Around them the noise of the feast swelled back up, hundreds of voices and clinking glasses and the smell of extraordinary food, and Harry let it all happen around him and ate his roast chicken and thought carefully about the chess game he'd been moved into without consent and how different it was to play a game when you knew it was happening. The candles floated above them. The stars wheeled through the enchanted ceiling. At the head table, Dumbledore was still smiling. He raised a glass when he caught Harry's eye again. Harry watched the gesture for a moment, assessing it with something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite contempt but was very close to understanding the play, the players, the board. Then he looked back at his food, and didn't raise his glass, and kept eating. Later that night, after the feast and the sorting and the long confused walk through moving staircases to the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat on his bed in the first-year dormitory and thought. The other boys were asleep. Ron's curtains were drawn. Outside, the Scottish night pressed cold against the castle walls, and somewhere above them an owl passed through dark air, hunting. Harry opened his hand. In his palm, he'd been carrying the thing he'd pocketed during the walk upstairs, a piece of parchment, folded small, pressed into his hand in the corridor by a hand he hadn't seen. He unfolded it now. The handwriting was not Dumbledore's. It was cramped and angular and fast, the writing of someone who thought faster than they wrote. You should visit the hospital wing first thing tomorrow. Pomfrey will have completed her full analysis by then. Ask her for the compound list, she is obligated to provide it under right of true accounting protocols. You will want to know exactly what was used. Some of it is quite specific. Specific enough to be traced. Do not trust anyone who smiles at inconvenient news. No signature. Harry turned the parchment over. Nothing on the back. He read the note twice more, committing it, then held it over the small candle he'd left burning and watched it take the flame. He was not afraid. He was not angry, in the explosive, uncontrolled way that 11-year-olds had a right to be angry when they discovered their lives had been engineered. He was something steadier than that. Something that had been waiting a long time, in the cupboard, in the school corridors, in every moment he'd done something extraordinary and had no language for it, waiting to be given its proper context. Now it had context. He thought about his mother. Lily Potter. Her eyes and her resistance and the thing she'd given him that was more fundamental than any spell. He thought about 500 attempts and 500 failures and a man at the head table who kept smiling, who had aimed a gun at a child for a decade and never known the gun wasn't loaded. He blew out the candle. He lay back on the best mattress he'd ever slept on in his life, in the first real bedroom that had ever been his, at the school he'd felt belonging toward before he knew he had reason to be suspicious, and he looked at the dark above him. That was yours, the hat had said about the belonging. That is yours. His. All of it. Every piece of himself that had ever felt real had always been real. Nothing had been taken from him. The potions hadn't worked. He was entirely, stubbornly, irreducibly himself. He found that fact enormously satisfying. He would go to Pomfrey in the morning. He would get the compound list. He would start pulling on threads and seeing what unraveled, and he would do it calmly and carefully and without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching him panic. Hogwarts creaked around him, ancient stone and deep magic, settling into its nighttime rhythms. Something about it felt like it was deciding whether to trust him. He listened to it for a while. Fair enough, he thought, at the castle, at the dark, at the year stretching out ahead of him like a door he was choosing to walk through. I'm deciding the same thing about you. He closed his eyes. For the first time in memory, possibly for the first time in his life, Harry Potter slept without dreaming of anything at all. Chapter 2, Residue. Harry was up before anyone else in the dormitory. He didn't plan it that way, he'd simply woken at 6 in the morning the way he always woke, trained by years in the cupboard to be moving before Aunt Petunia could pound on the door and make moving feel like punishment. Old habits. He lay still for a moment in the unfamiliar dark, listening to the alien sounds of the castle, distant water, the low groan of ancient stone, something that might have been wind and might have been something else entirely, and remembered where he was and what had happened and what he'd decided to do about it. He was dressed and out of the dormitory before the first trace of light touched the windows. The Gryffindor common room was empty at this hour, fire burned down to deep orange coals, armchairs holding the shapes of people who'd sat in them for years. Harry stood in it for a moment and looked at it properly, the kind of looking you can only do when no one's watching, and thought that it felt like a place that had absorbed a lot of living, the same way some old books felt like they'd been thought over a great many times. He liked it. He went through the portrait hole before he could get too comfortable. The corridors of Hogwarts at 6 in the morning were a different country from the corridors at any other time. Empty, lit by torches that burned lower at night and hadn't quite decided to brighten for the day, full of the specific quality of silence that very old buildings generate when no one's in them. Harry walked quickly and quietly and paid attention, cataloguing routes and turnings the same way he'd catalogued the Dursleys' house as a child, which paths were safe, which doors to avoid, where things were in relation to each other. The castle shifted, which he'd been told about and was now experiencing firsthand. A staircase that had been going left the night before was now going right, with the bland indifference of something that didn't consider your schedule its problem. He found the hospital wing by following the smell of something antiseptic and clean underneath the general stone and old wood smell of the castle, and the door was open, and inside Madame Pomfrey was already at her desk with a cup of tea going cold beside her and a stack of parchment that she'd clearly been working on since well before 6. She looked up when he came in and was not surprised to see him. "Mr. Potter." "Good morning," Harry said. "I was told you'd have the compound list ready." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was trying to be professionally neutral and not entirely succeeding. Then she picked up the top sheet of the parchment stack and held it out. "You were told correctly." He crossed the ward and took it. It was a long sheet, longer than he expected, dense with small neat writing, compound names in Latin and English and a few he suspected were something else entirely. Numbers beside each entry, dates, dosage estimates, classification levels. He stood in the middle of the hospital wing in the early morning light and read the whole thing from top to bottom without comment. It took a while. When he finished, he looked up. "Some of these," he said, tapping a cluster of entries near the bottom, "are from after I arrived in Diagon Alley. 2 days ago." "Yes," Pomfrey said. "The delivery method appears to have shifted from liquid administration to something airborne or contact-based in the most recent instances. I believe someone anticipated that you might become harder to dose in person once you were at Hogwarts." "Someone anticipated," Harry said. "I chose that word deliberately." She picked up her tea, realized it was cold, set it back down. "Mr. Potter, you should know that I am in a professionally unusual position. What my diagnostic revealed yesterday falls under reporting obligations that she stopped. That I intend to fulfill. Completely. The right of true accounting creates a chain of accountability that cannot be quietly closed. A record was made publicly last night, in front of every student and staff member in this school, and that record now exists in the Hogwarts founding charter as a formal entry. It cannot be erased. It cannot be explained away." She met his eyes. "I want you to understand that what happened last night has legal weight. Significant legal weight." "I understand," Harry said. "Who does the report go to?" "The Board of Governors, primarily. Potentially the Ministry, depending on compound classifications." She paused. 2 of the compounds on that list are controlled substances under the 1978 Magical Potions Act. Restricted class. Meaning not only are they illegal to administer without consent, they're illegal to possess without a specific medical license. Harry looked at the list again and found the 2 entries she meant. The dosage estimates beside them were written in slightly smaller script, like Pomfrey had needed to reduce her handwriting to fit the number. "When will the report go out?" he asked. "I sent the preliminary last night. The full analysis will be ready by this afternoon." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Potter, I am also obligated to ask, do you want to request legal representation? Under right of true accounting protocols, you're entitled to an advocate." "I'll think about that," Harry said, and folded the compound list carefully and put it in his pocket. "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey." "Eat breakfast," she said, in the tone of someone who had noticed the slight hollowness under his cheekbones and had professional opinions about it. "A proper one." "I will," he said, and meant it. He was almost at the door when she said, quietly, "Your mother was one of my patients. Briefly, in her 7th year. She had the same immunity, I noted it in her file at the time." It was a clinical curiosity then. I never thought, she stopped herself. Harry turned around. I should have made connections I didn't make, she said. I want you to know that I intend to do better. He looked at her for a moment. You're doing it now, he said, and left. The great hall was perhaps a third full by the time Harry arrived, mostly older students in various states of morning functional, a handful of professors at the head table drinking coffee with the focused dedication of people who needed it. Harry took a seat at the Gryffindor table, loaded his plate with everything that was hot and substantial, and ate with intent. He'd been sitting alone for about 10 minutes when Hermione appeared and sat across from him without asking, which he appreciated because asking would have introduced the possibility of being told no. She had a book. She'd apparently been awake since approximately the founding of the school, judging by her expression, and she put the book spine up on the table and leaned forward and said, at a volume calibrated for their table only, I looked it up. I expected you would, Harry said. The right of true accounting. It's not just what Pomfrey said, it creates a formal evidentiary chain. Everything disclosed under it is automatically entered into the Hogwarts record, which is a separate legal instrument from the school's regular records. The Board of Governors has to respond within 30 days. The Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement has to be notified within 48 hours. She paused. That last part is Statute 9 of the 1856 Hogwarts Charter Amendment. 48 hours from last night, Harry said. Yes. He ate a piece of toast. That means the notification goes out today regardless of what anyone does. Or tries to do, Hermione said, with a precision that suggested she had thought carefully about what sort of interference might be attempted and had preempted it intellectually. The record is in the charter. It's physical, not magical. The charter is a bound document, not an enchanted one, specifically because the founders didn't want it susceptible to magical tampering. Someone would have to physically destroy the charter to alter the record, and the charter is kept in Gringotts, Harry said. Hermione blinked. Yes. How did you know? Hagrid mentioned it. He went there yesterday to get something from my vault. He said the bank kept certain things. He looked at her. The founders were smart. Exceptionally, Hermione agreed, and then seemed to realize she was complimenting people who had been dead for 1,000 years and refocused. The point is, the legal machinery is already moving. It's out of anyone's hands now. She hesitated, and in the hesitation Harry could see her turning over something more personal. Harry. The compounds Pomfrey mentioned. Do you know where they came from? I have a list, Harry said. Not which compounds. Who gave them to you? Harry looked at her. He thought about what he wanted to say, and about the fact that Hermione Granger had sat down across from him of her own volition on the second morning of knowing him and had already done 4 hours of legal research on his behalf, and that none of that was engineered. I don't have proof, he said. I have the compound list, which will produce a paper trail if someone follows it seriously. And I have what the hat said. What did the hat say? She asked. That the person who administered the potions didn't intend me harm in any traditional sense. That the intent was to ensure I'd fulfill a specific purpose without questioning it. He watched her take that in. And that I've been treated my whole life as if the potions were working. The implication settled over Hermione's face in sequence, like cards being laid down. He watched her reach the last card and go very still. Your whole life, she said quietly. Every act of kindness. Every act of guidance. Every time someone made a decision for me or protected me from information. He picked up his orange juice. All of it was calibrated on the assumption that I was compliant. That I would go where I was aimed. But you weren't. No. He drank. I was just me. The whole time. Hermione was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that wasn't quite anger but was close to its intellectual cousin, the particular heat of someone who found a systematic deception philosophically offensive. That's almost worse, she said. That they did all of that for nothing. That every calculation was based on a false premise. Almost worse, Harry agreed, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. She made a slight face that might have been a smile and wasn't quite. Can I see the list? He took it out and passed it across the table. She read it the way she read everything, fast, thorough, with a small furrow between her brows that deepened when she hit the restricted compounds. These two, she said, tapping the same entries Pomfrey had indicated. Illegal, Harry said. Highly illegal. She kept reading. Some of these are very sophisticated. This one, she touched an entry near the middle of the list. I've read about this in Potions Theory. It's not commercially available. It was developed in a research context in the 70s. You'd have to know exactly who developed it and have access to either their notes or their contacts to obtain a sample. She looked up. Someone with extensive connections to the potion-making world. Someone with authority to access restricted research. Someone like a headmaster, Harry said. Hermione folded the list and handed it back to him and picked up her book, and Harry had the sense she was using it as something to hold rather than something to read, a way to keep her hands from giving away how much she was feeling. What are you going to do? She asked. Right now. Finish breakfast. He took a deliberate bite of egg. Then go to my first class and be a student. Pay attention. Learn things. He paused. And wait. Wait for what? For the next move. He looked toward the head table. Dumbledore's chair was empty. Snape was there, though, drinking something dark, and his black eyes moved across the hall in a slow sweep that paused, for the briefest moment, on Harry. Someone's already moving. I want to see where they go before I decide where I'm going. Professor Snape was moving. He'd been moving since 5 in the morning, when he'd retrieved a very specific set of files from a locked cabinet in his private stores, files he'd been keeping for 6 years, written in a cipher only he knew, documenting things he'd noticed and chosen not to act on and chosen not to discard. Choices he was now reconsidering in the light of last night's events with the particular discomfort of a man who had always known exactly what those choices had cost him and had found a dozen ways to justify the cost. He sat in his dungeon office with the files open and thought about Lily Evans, who had been Lily Potter for long enough to have a son with her immunity and her eyes, and who was dead because of decisions made by men who had decided she was a component in something larger than herself. He thought about what the hat had said. 500 administrations. He'd known about the potions, not the specific number, not the precise compounds, but the principle of it. Dumbledore had mentioned them to him years ago with the smooth casualness of someone managing a complex situation, framed not as what they were but as a precautionary measure, a calibration, something to ensure the boy would be ready for what he needed to face. Snape had said nothing. He had filed it under the long list of things Dumbledore did that Snape found distasteful but that fit within the architecture of what Snape understood to be a necessary plan. The hat had counted 500 and said immune since birth, and Snape had sat at the head table last night feeling something crack in the structure he'd built his choices on, very quietly, in a place no one was going to see. He put the files away when a knock came at his office door. He checked the time. 8:15. First years didn't have potions until Thursday. There was only one person likely to knock at this hour. Come in, he said. The door opened. Albus Dumbledore stepped through it and closed the door behind him, and if there was anything in his expression beyond warm concern and mild academic interest, Snape couldn't see it, which told him a great deal. Good morning, Severus. Headmaster. Snape leaned back in his chair. You're here early. I find these situations benefit from prompt attention. Dumbledore settled into the chair across the desk with the ease of someone who had never in his life entered a room without having decided it was his. Last night was unexpected. Was it? Snape said, keeping his voice flat. A pause. You're angry. I am professional, Snape said. Tell me what you want. Dumbledore looked at him with those eyes that were always warm and always calculating and always both at once, and Snape looked back with the expression he'd spent 20 years perfecting, the one that gave away nothing. I want to know where the diagnostic results are. I was unable to access Poppy's report. Pomfrey follows right of true accounting protocols, Snape said. You know this. I know that a report from a school medical officer to the board is typically processed through the headmaster's office. Typically, Snape agreed. Not when the right has been invoked. The charter amendment is specific. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You also know this, Albus. Another pause, longer. Severus. I need you to understand the broader context of, I've been supporting the broader context for 15 years, Snape said, and his voice was very quiet and very even and contained nothing that could be called emotional except that it contained too little, the way a room looks empty because someone has very recently and very deliberately moved everything out of it. I understood it when it was a war. I understood it when it was strategy. I understood it when it was sacrifice, even difficult sacrifice. I am less certain I understand it as what it was. He let that land. 500 times, Albus. For an immunity the child was born with. For nothing. We couldn't have known, we should have tested, Snape said, sharply enough that Dumbledore went still. Elementary. We should have tested the efficacy before the 10th administration, let alone the 500th. Any competent potions practitioner would have. He stopped. Exhaled. The boy's mother had the immunity documented in her Hogwarts medical file. It was available information. The silence that followed was a specific quality that Snape recognized, the silence of a man who knew exactly what the other person knew and was calculating how much to acknowledge. I need your support on this, Severus, Dumbledore said at last, and there it was, finally, stripped of the warm framing, support, which in Dumbledore's vocabulary had always meant compliance. You need a great many things, Snape said. I'm going to give you a piece of information as a professional courtesy, and then I'm going to ask you to leave my office. He opened his desk drawer and removed a single piece of parchment, not the files, something else, newer. Harry Potter made 3 stops this morning before breakfast. The hospital wing, at 6:10. He was there for 23 minutes and left with Pomfrey's compound list, which she was obligated to provide. The Ollery, at 6:40. He looked at Dumbledore. He sent 2 letters. I was unable to determine the recipients from my angle of observation, but I can tell you he used school owls, not his own, and he wrote both letters in the hospital wing before he left. Dumbledore was very still. And then he went to breakfast, Snape said, where he ate a proper meal for what I suspect may be the first time in his life, and discussed Hogwarts founding charter law with Hermione Granger in a tone of voice I would characterize as organized. He put the parchment back. The boy was up before 6, Albus. On his first morning at Hogwarts. He didn't sleep in, he didn't explore, he didn't do any of the things an 11-year-old who had just been told his entire life was manipulated might reasonably do. He went straight to work. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. He is not what the potions would have made him. But I don't think he's what you expected without them, either. Dumbledore rose from the chair. His expression was still pleasant, still warm, still everything it always was, but his hands, Snape noticed, were very carefully relaxed. Consciously relaxed. Thank you, Severus. My office, Snape said, is not available for this conversation again. Dumbledore paused at the door. You chose a side once, he said. I hope you remember which one led you here. I remember exactly which choices led me here, Snape said. That's precisely why I'm making different ones. The door closed. Snape sat alone in his dungeon office and looked at the wall for a while, and then he took out a fresh piece of parchment and began to write. Not in cipher. Plainly. For the first time in 15 years, writing something he intended someone to read. Harry's first official lesson as a Hogwarts student was Transfiguration, and Professor McGonagall was the kind of teacher who communicated everything you needed to know about her through structure. She was already at the front when the Gryffindors filed in, standing rather than sitting, and she looked at them over her square spectacles and said nothing until every seat was filled and the last whisper had died. Then she turned into a cat. Harry would think about this moment later and try to identify what his reaction had been, and the best he could come up with was, correct. It felt correct, in the way that things feel correct when you've been quietly expecting them to be interesting and they are, in fact, interesting. Around him the class gasped and shuffled and oohed, and Hermione made a small controlled sound of intellectual delight. Harry just watched. McGonagall turned back into herself and said, "Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone who messes around in my class will leave and not come back." She said this to all of them, but when her eyes moved over the room they paused on Harry for a half-second, just long enough for Harry to register that she was looking at him specifically, and that the look was not a threat but something more layered, assessment, maybe, or acknowledgement, or the look someone gives you when they're working out how much they owe you for something they should have done differently. He nodded, slightly. She moved on. The lesson was matches to needles, and Harry had his match silver-tipped after 7 minutes, fully transformed after 14. He worked quietly and methodically and didn't wave the result around when it happened, just showed McGonagall when she passed and let her note it in her register with the clipped satisfaction of someone who had expected nothing less. Afterward, in the corridor, Neville Longbottom fell into step beside him. Harry had been watching Neville since the sorting, the way the hat had paused on him longer than most, the way Neville had sat on that stool with his hands gripping his robes and his chin up with a kind of preemptive stubbornness that Harry recognized as the posture of someone who expected things to go wrong and was decided not to let that stop them. He'd come out of the sorting quietly, settled into the Gryffindor table quietly, and spent the whole feast with the attentiveness of someone listening for something beneath what was being said. "Your match worked on the first try," Neville said. "Second try," Harry said. "First try got the tip. Mine didn't work at all." He paused. "I heard what happened to yours in herbology last term, I mean, what the hat said. The sorting." He stopped walking. Harry stopped with him. Neville looked at him with those square, earnest features and eyes that were doing more thinking than people typically gave Neville credit for. "My parents are at St. Mungo's," he said. "Have been since I was a year old. Bellatrix Lestrange. You know about this, I expect, most people do." "I'd heard," Harry said. "What I'm going to say, I've never said to anyone," Neville said, with the deliberate slowness of someone who had weighed exactly this decision and was committing to it. Before Bellatrix, my gran told me that Dumbledore had been at our house 3 times in the week before it happened. She didn't think anything of it then because he was supposed to be, he was trusted. But he never came after. For my parents. He was very busy in the days following. And there was one moment, when my gran was sorting through my dad's papers after St. Mungo's, where she found a letter. She burned it. She told me about it years later, she'd burned it first and told me about it later, which tells you something about what was in it." "What was in it?" Harry asked. "The letter was from Dumbledore to my father," Neville said. "Written 3 days before the attack. And according to my gran, before she burned it, it contained specific information about where my parents would be that week. Specific enough to be a location disclosure." He held Harry's eyes. "My gran believes he burned the letter because she was there when she burned it and she needed to tell someone, and she chose me because she had no one else to trust and I was 12. I've been carrying it since." He paused. "Last night, when the hat spoke, I thought about the letter. I thought maybe," he stopped. "You're not alone in it," Harry said. "Whatever it is." Neville let out a breath that had been held for longer than last night. "Right," he said. Yeah. Okay." He started walking again. "I'm rubbish at transfiguration, by the way." "We can work on it," Harry said. "You don't have to, I know I don't have to." Neville was quiet for a step or two. "Okay," he said again, and this time it meant something else entirely. The letter Harry had sent that morning, one of 2, as Snape had correctly observed, arrived at its destination by 11. The recipient was a goblin named Ragnarok, senior account manager at Gringotts, to whom Harry's account was assigned. The letter was short and politely worded and contained one substantive request, that Gringotts conduct an independent audit of the Potter family account with particular attention to any unusual disbursements made to third parties, any documented agreements made on Harry's behalf without his verified consent, and any access logs showing who had been in contact with the account during Harry's minority. Harry knew about this option because of the compound list. 2 of the entries were not potions you could buy, they had to be custom ordered, commissioned, paid for. Money left a trail. Goblins kept meticulous records. And Gringotts, unlike almost every other institution in the wizarding world, answered to no one except their own code and the contracts signed in front of them. The second letter had gone to Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose name Harry had found in a book in the common room the previous evening, a guide to wizarding government that some previous Gryffindor student had left on a shelf and annotated helpfully throughout. The annotation beside Bones' name said, in faded pencil, "Straight as they come. Trust her if you have to trust someone in MLE." Anonymous annotations from unknown students were not, strictly speaking, a reliable intelligence source. But the right of true accounting meant Bones was going to receive the formal notification within 48 hours regardless. Harry had simply made sure she received a personal letter first, informing her that when that notification arrived, the student in question was aware of it and available for interview, and that there were supplementary materials, specifically, a compound list obtained under right of true accounting protocols, that she might wish to examine. He hadn't named anyone. He didn't need to yet. He just needed Bones to know, before anyone spoke to her about this, that Harry Potter was not confused, not traumatized, and not waiting to be told how to feel about what had happened to him. He was already working. By afternoon, Hogwarts knew something was happening even if it didn't know what. The older students had all been at the feast. Every one of them had watched the hat refuse to sort Harry, had heard Pomfrey's findings read out in the Great Hall, and had spent the morning processing what that meant with varying degrees of success. The fourth-year Hufflepuffs had apparently conducted a seminar on it over breakfast. The Slytherin seventh years were notably quiet in a way that suggested furious private communication. In the corridors between classes, Harry caught fragments of conversation that stopped when he came close, and he let them stop, because that was information too, who stopped talking, and who didn't. Fred and George Weasley found him between charms and lunch, appearing at his elbows from opposite sides with the synchronized ease of people who have been operating as a unit since birth. "Harry Potter," said Fred, who Harry was fairly sure was Fred based purely on the fact that he'd been standing on the left. "We've been discussing something." "At length," said George. "All morning." "We were at the feast," Fred said. "We were at the feast," George confirmed. Harry looked at them both. They were watching him with the bright, assessing eyes of people who had a particular talent for identifying which way the wind was blowing. "And?" Harry said. "And we've also been Gryffindors for 4 years, Fred said, under a headmaster who," he paused, choosing, "runs a very particular kind of chess game." "Not all of us are unaware of it," George said. "We just usually don't have any pieces. Whereas you," Fred said, "appear to have woken up this morning with the whole board." Harry considered them for a moment. There was something in the twins that reminded him of himself, the particular quality of people who had been underestimated consistently enough that they developed a sophisticated relationship with being underestimated. People who had learned to give the impression of less than they were, not from fear but from strategic preference. "What do you want?" he asked. "To know if there's something useful we can do," George said. "Specifically useful," Fred clarified. "Not cheerleading. Actual utility." Harry thought about it. He thought about the common room and the moving staircases and the portrait holes and the specific kind of institutional intelligence that came from 4 years of inhabiting a space and paying attention. "Do you know who Peeves talks to?" he asked. The twins exchanged a look. "We have an understanding with Peeves," Fred said carefully. "He likes us," George said. "Professionally." Good, Harry said. I want to know if any unusual visitors come through the castle in the next week. Staff meetings that weren't scheduled. Owls that come in on restricted channels. Anyone in Dumbledore's office after hours. Another exchanged look, this one longer. Then Fred said, "You're 11. I'm aware," Harry said. 11, George said again, but he was smiling. Right. Okay. We'll let you know. They peeled off into the corridor crowd in opposite directions, casual as anything, and Harry went to lunch and ate his sandwich and watched the head table and thought about boards and pieces and the particular advantage of being a player who had been mistaken for a pawn. Snape's second-year Slytherin Gryffindor double potions that afternoon was largely unremarkable except for one moment, 30 minutes in, when Snape was moving between the workbenches and paused beside Harry's station for slightly longer than the average pause. Harry was doing fine, his potion was the right color, the right consistency, his cutting was even. Snape stood beside him for a moment that stretched just past casual. "Your lacewing flies are chopped too coarsely," Snape said, in his usual tone, which was precisely calibrated to make students feel they'd done something dimmer than they actually had. Harry looked at his cutting board. His lacewing flies were perfectly chopped. He looked up at Snape. Snape's expression was completely neutral. His eyes, though, dropped to the bench for a fraction of a second, and Harry followed the drop. Snape's hand, passing the bench, had left something, a small folded note, pressed under the corner of Harry's ingredient tray. Harry palmed it without looking at it and went back to his chopping. "I'll redo them," he said. "See that you do," Snape said, and moved on. Harry read the note in the dormitory that night. It was shorter than the one from the previous evening, same cramped handwriting. The 2 restricted compounds. Compound 7 on the list, do not come to me. I will come to you. Harry read it twice. Then 3 times. Then he sat with it for a while and thought about a man who had made something knowing what it was for, and carried that knowledge for 6 years, and had chosen last night, after the hat spoke, after the numbers were read out in the Great Hall, after the silence fell, to do something different. He wasn't going to trust Snape. Not yet. You didn't get trust by passing notes, you got trust by showing up when it cost you something. But the note went into the same secure place as Pomfrey's compound list, and the note from the previous evening, and the growing architecture of a case that was being built piece by piece, detail by detail, by a boy who had 11 years of experience adapting to environments that expected him to be smaller than he was. He was done being small. He slept again without dreaming, and the castle settled around him, and somewhere above in the headmaster's tower, a man who had been playing a long game was sitting with his phoenix and reconsidering several of his assumptions, and the reconsidering looked, from the outside, exactly like calm. It was not calm. Harry knew it wasn't. He'd seen the eyes. Outside, the Scottish sky turned from dark blue to black, and the stars came out, and Hogwarts breathed around its stones, and in every corner of it things were moving that had been still for a very long time. Chapter 3, 500 The reply from Gringotts arrived on Thursday. Harry was at breakfast when the owl came in, not a school owl, but a Gringotts courier bird, gunmetal grey with yellow eyes and the particular bearing of something that delivered financial documents professionally and had no interest in being charming about it. It landed directly in front of Harry, dropped a sealed envelope, and left without waiting for a treat. The envelope was thick and heavy and sealed with black wax stamped with a pickaxe. Ron, sitting beside him, said nothing but shifted his orange juice approximately 3 inches to the left to give Harry room. Hermione, across the table, watched the envelope land and then very deliberately looked at her porridge. Harry broke the seal and read. The audit had been expedited. Ragnarok had apparently treated the request with considerable seriousness, which told Harry something about how Gringotts regarded the situation even before he finished the first paragraph. The letter was written in the formal language of Goblin accountancy, which was precise to the point of being weaponized, and what it said, stripped of the formal language, was this: the Potter family account had been accessed 43 times during Harry's minority by a party operating under a limited guardianship authorization dated November 2, 1981, the day after his parents died. The authorization had been filed by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, citing emergency circumstances and the temporary absence of any qualified magical guardian. It allowed for the management of certain trust expenditures on behalf of the minor Harry James Potter. The authorization had been renewed annually. It had never been formally reviewed or contested. It had never been time-limited. It had simply continued, year after year, renewed in a single signature with no oversight committee and no audit trail beyond Dumbledore's own records. Total disbursements under the authorization over 10 years, 8,412 galleons. A breakdown of expenditures was attached. The majority were standard trust management items, maintenance on properties, tax assessments, the usual architecture of managing a wealthy estate on behalf of a minor. But there were line items, 17 of them, listed under the heading Specialist Medical Consultations, that totaled 2,100 galleons. Harry found item 7 in the disbursements list. Commissioned 1985. Payable to a private potions laboratory in Edinburgh. Amount, 300 galleons. He looked at the note Snape had left him 2 days ago. Compound 7, Veritatis Amor, experimental batch. Commissioned 1985. Paid for through a discretionary educational fund. The discretionary educational fund was his own trust account. Dumbledore had used Harry's own money to pay for the potions being used on Harry. Harry put the letter down on the table. He picked up his toast. He took a bite. He chewed it. He put it back down. Hermione was watching him with the careful attention of someone who had learned in 48 hours that Harry's stillness was a more significant signal than most people's noise. Good news? Ron said, attempting lightness and landing somewhere adjacent to it. Clarifying news, Harry said. He folded the letter back into the envelope and put it in his bag, and he ate the rest of his breakfast, and he was in the corridor outside the great hall before he stopped and stood with his back against the stone wall and thought, for a moment, about the fact that the man who had been dosing him was using his dead parents' money to do it. He breathed in through his nose. Out through his mouth. It was not that this was the worst thing on the list. Technically it wasn't even in the top 5. But there was something about the specific detail of it, the recycled gold, the casual loops of the mechanism, that was worse than malice would have been. Malice had heat. This had the cold, clean efficiency of someone who had organized an elaborate system and stopped noticing what was inside it. He pushed off the wall and went to Charms. Friday afternoon was the first potions class. Harry had been thinking about Snape since the note, thinking about what it meant to receive useful intelligence from a direction he hadn't expected and how to hold that alongside the 11 years of context that said Snape had known and chosen silence. He'd reached a working position, the note was data, Snape was a source, and sources were useful in proportion to what they were willing to give up and when. He'd know more when he saw what Snape did next. What Snape did next was teach potions. He swept into the dungeon classroom and let the darkness work for him and said, "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class," and then for 45 minutes he taught, with a lucid, impatient brilliance that Harry suspected very few of his students appreciated because they were too busy being intimidated to listen properly. Harry listened properly. He took notes. He asked one question, quietly, about the chemical interaction between two of the ingredients Snape was discussing, and Snape paused and looked at him with an expression of involuntary recalibration before answering in more depth than the question technically required. The class ended. Students filed out. Harry lingered over his notes. When the room was empty except the two of them, Snape said, without turning from the board he was erasing, "I don't make a habit of repeat gestures." "I'm not asking you to repeat it," Harry said. "I'm asking whether you'd be willing to give a formal statement to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement about Compound 19. Snape stopped erasing. "You've moved quickly." "I've had the Gringotts audit since this morning," Harry said. "The disbursements link 7 of the restricted compounds directly to my trust account. The paper trail is there. What it needs is testimony about intent and commission. You said you'd provide a statement when the time was legally appropriate. He met Snape's eyes when Snape turned around. When is that, specifically? Snape looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his expression that was doing complex work, not warmth, nothing as simple as that, but something that had been reorganizing itself since Wednesday morning and was still finding its final shape. You understand that a statement from me will be contested, he said. My history as a former Death Eater will be used to discredit your statement combined with the financial records, Pomfrey's diagnostic, and the Hogwarts charter entry doesn't need to be uncontestable, Harry said. It needs to meet the evidentiary threshold for a formal investigation, which is lower. Once there's a formal investigation, the Ministry has to compel testimony and records from all parties. That's when it becomes uncontestable. Snape was quiet for a beat that had a slightly different quality to it. You are 11 years old, he said, in approximately the same tone Fred Weasley had used, except where the twins had found it amusing, Snape found it something else. You keep saying that like it changes something, Harry said. It changes nothing, Snape said, which seemed to surprise him slightly as he said it. He turned back to the board. I will file a statement. I'll need until Monday. There are aspects of the documentation that need to be in order first. Aspects that implicate my own negligence, which I intend to include rather than omit, because omitting them will only give someone grounds to question the rest. That's honest, Harry said. It's strategic, Snape said. Don't romanticize it. Harry picked up his bag. At the door, he said, Did you know her well? My mother. The room went very still. She was, Snape said, after a pause that had the careful weight of something old in it, the most genuinely talented which I have ever personally known. Her immunity was, I knew about it. I should have made connections I didn't make. He paused again. That's the honest version. That's enough, Harry said, and left. Saturday morning, the letter from Amelia Bones arrived. It was brief. Formal. The kind of letter that had been written and reviewed carefully and stripped of anything that could be characterized as either endorsement or alarm. It acknowledged receipt of Harry's earlier correspondence. It informed him that the formal 48-hour notification under the right of true accounting had been received and that a preliminary inquiry had been opened. It advised him to retain any documentation he had gathered and to be available for a formal interview at a time to be determined. The last paragraph said, Your correspondence was noted. You may also find it useful to know that you are entitled, under the provisions of the 1912 Magical Minors Protection Act, to petition for independent magical guardianship review if you have reason to believe your current guardianship arrangements are not in your best interests. Such a petition can be filed by the minor directly. It requires no external sponsor. Harry read that last paragraph 3 times. He was eating alone, Hermione was at the library, Ron was at Quidditch trials he wasn't old enough to attend but was watching anyway, and he put the letter down and drank his coffee and thought about Petunia Dursley and the cupboard and 10 years of being very specifically small in that house. He thought about whether Petunia had been coerced, as the hat had implied, or whether she'd been willing, or whether there was a version of events where both of those things were partially true in ways that didn't absolve anyone. He thought that the guardianship question was going to be its own separate and significant problem, and that he was going to need to be careful about how he addressed it, because moving too fast on too many fronts simultaneously would let people characterize him as destabilizing rather than reasonable. He pocketed Bones' letter and went to the library. Hermione looked up from a table covered in more books than a single person could read in a weekend and said, I've been researching something. Good, Harry said, sitting across from her. What? The prophecy, she said quietly, and pushed a book toward him. It was open to a chapter on divination law, specifically the legal framework around prophecy records held in the Department of Mysteries. Prophecies are stored in the Hall of Prophecy. They can only be removed by the subjects named in them. The content of a prophecy is technically classified, only the subjects are supposed to know what it says. She met his eyes. But the existence of a prophecy can be documented. The filing record would show when it was filed, who filed it, and which subjects were designated. "Can I access that record?" Harry asked. "Not easily. Not at 11. She paused. "But a petition for independent guardianship review might include a clause requesting full disclosure of any prophecies in which the minor is named. It's unprecedented, but under the 1912 Act, the minor's right to self-determination includes knowledge of any formal magical designations affecting them." She had the look of someone who had found an interesting legal argument and was still slightly surprised it was pointing somewhere this significant. "I've been working on the petition draft." Harry looked at the draft she slid across the table. It was 8 pages, dense and thorough, with cited statutes in the margins and footnotes that referenced case law going back to the 19th century. "Hermione," he said. "Yes. You did this since last night?" She adjusted a stack of books. "I work quickly." Harry read the petition. It was genuinely good, precise without being aggressive, framed around Harry's right to information rather than as an accusation, with layers that each built on the last and collectively created a picture that was hard to argue with. He read it again and found one clause that could be strengthened and pointed to it. Hermione looked at it, made a face, and agreed. "There's something else I want to add," Harry said. "A request for independent magical assessment. Something separate from Pomfrey's diagnostic, a formal evaluation of my magical ability by an external examiner, not affiliated with Hogwarts." Hermione frowned. "Why?" "Because I want to know," Harry said simply. "I know the potions were meant to make me compliant. The hat said my courage and loyalty were always mine. But I want to know what I'm actually capable of, not what Dumbledore thought I was, not what anyone else thought I was. Just what's real." She considered this. "There's also a practical argument," she said slowly. "If you're going to be in any kind of legal proceeding, having an independent assessment of your current magical state on record prevents anyone from claiming the potions had effects you weren't aware of." "That too," Harry agreed. She added the clause. Harry watched her write and thought about what a strange and excellent thing it was, to have someone on your side who had decided to be there themselves. Sunday was the day Dumbledore called Harry to his office. The summons came through McGonagall, which was deliberate, using her as the messenger was a way of putting her in the room without putting her in the room. She handed Harry the note in the corridor between the Great Hall and the first-floor stairs, and her face did something complicated when she gave it to him. "Professor," Harry said, before she could leave, "am I required to go?" She stopped. Turned. "Required," she repeated. "Is it a disciplinary summons? Or an administrative one? Or something else?" McGonagall looked at him for a moment, and Harry had the clear sense that she was having a conversation with herself about several things at once and that the conversation was not comfortable. "It's informal," she said carefully. "The headmaster wishes to speak with you." "Then I can decline." "Harry, if it's informal, it's optional." He held her gaze. "I'm not trying to be difficult, Professor. I'm asking because I need to know what my actual obligations are, versus what's being framed as an obligation." She was quiet for a moment. "You're correct," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "An informal summons is not compulsory. Will you be present if I do go?" Another pause. Longer. "If you wish it." "I do," Harry said. "And I'd like to go at a time of my choosing, not his. Tomorrow afternoon, after my last class. Would that work?" McGonagall straightened very slightly, and in the straightening Harry read something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who had been waiting for permission to stand differently and had just received it. "I'll inform the headmaster," she said. He thanked her and went to lunch. Monday afternoon, Harry climbed to the headmaster's office. McGonagall was waiting outside the gargoyle. She didn't say anything when Harry arrived, just walked with him through the entrance and up the moving staircase and knocked on the office door. Harry went first. The office was circular and extraordinary, books and instruments, portraits of previous headmasters dozing in their frames, the phoenix fox on his perch watching Harry with eyes that were both very old and completely present. Harry looked at Fawkes and Fawkes looked back at him, and the bird made no sound but its feathers settled slightly, which seemed like a judgment of some kind. Dumbledore was standing by the window with his hands clasped behind him, looking out over the grounds. He turned when they entered with the warm smile fully operational, spreading it equally over both of them as if this were any Monday afternoon and the last week had been entirely ordinary. "Harry," he said. "Thank you for coming. Minerva." He gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit." Harry sat. McGonagall sat beside him. Dumbledore took the chair across, and for a moment the three of them looked at each other, and the pleasant domestic quality of it was so precisely calibrated that Harry almost wanted to applaud the technique. "I wanted to speak with you informally," Dumbledore said, "before the formal processes that have been set in motion become," he paused, "overwhelming for someone your age." "I initiated most of those processes," Harry said. "I'm not overwhelmed." "Of course not." The smile held. "You've been remarkably capable, Harry, these past few days. Truly. Your mother would be proud." "I expect she would," Harry said. "Can you tell me specifically which compound she was immune to?" The smile didn't waver. "I'm not sure I follow." "Lily Potter's medical file at Hogwarts documented her immunity to compulsion magic," Harry said. "You were headmaster when she was a student here. You would have had access to those files. So I'm curious when you became aware of her immunity, and whether you considered, before commissioning Compound 7 in 1985, that her son might have inherited it." McGonagall made a very small sound. Dumbledore was still. Completely still, in the way that things go still when they are exerting significant force. His expression was the same. His hands were relaxed in his lap. Only his eyes had changed, they were doing that thing again, the calculated stillness under the warm surface, but Harry was closer now and it was more visible. "Harry," he said, and his voice was different, not cold, nothing so artless as cold, but stripped of something, the way a room looks stripped of furniture. "I want you to understand that everything I have ever done has been in service of protecting you. The world you are part of, the war that defined it, some decisions require a cost that, I know what you thought the decisions required," Harry said. "I know what the potions were for. I know what I was for. I'm not asking you to explain your reasoning." He paused. "I'm asking a specific factual question. Did you know about my mother's immunity before you commissioned Compound 7 in 1985? The silence stretched. Dumbledore looked at him across the space between the chairs, and Harry looked back, and the silence went on long enough that the portraits in their frames had woken up and were watching with the avid attention of people at a sporting event. "No," Dumbledore said, finally. "That's not true," Harry said, pleasantly. Another silence. In it, one of the portraits, a heavy-set witch in a rough collar who Harry didn't recognize, muttered something to the portrait beside her that sounded like "Good Lord." "Harry, I'm not asking you to confess to anything," Harry said. "The legal process will establish what happened. I'm here because I wanted to look you in the eye and ask a specific question and see what you did with it." He leaned forward slightly. "You've been treating me as if I were compliant for my entire life. As if the potions had worked. So I want to be very clear with you, face to face, so that going forward there's no ambiguity, they didn't work. There is no version of me that was shaped by what you gave me. What you see right now," he indicated himself, simply, "is what I actually am. And what I actually am has spent the last week examining the architecture of the situation I've been placed in, and I understand it completely, and I am not afraid of it, and I am not afraid of you." Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved across his face that was too complex and too fast for Harry to fully read, not anger, not calculation, something more fundamental than either, something that might have been the first genuine surprise Albus Dumbledore had experienced in a very long time. "You are extraordinary," he said, quietly, and the warmth was gone from it entirely, which made it the most honest thing he'd said in the room. I'm 11, Harry said. Imagine what I'll be at 17. He stood. McGonagall stood beside him. One more thing, Harry said. I'm filing a petition for independent magical assessment and guardianship review this week. I'll be doing it through Madam Bones at the MLE. You'll receive a copy as interested party as required by statute. He picked up his bag. I'd appreciate it if the response to that petition, when it comes from your office, was filed through official channels and not through any informal conversations or gestures. I find official channels easier to track. He left. McGonagall left with him. The gargoyle ground shut behind them. In the stairwell, McGonagall stopped. She put one hand against the stone wall and stood there for a moment with her eyes closed, and Harry waited. I knew something was wrong, she said, not to him specifically, just to the air. I knew. There were moments over the years, I knew James and Lily, I knew what they were, and the boy I'd read about in reports and the boy I'd watched from a distance never quite. She stopped. I chose not to look directly at it. You're looking at it now, Harry said. That is a very generous assessment of my record, she said. It's an accurate one, Harry said. What you do from Harry thought about 10 years in a cupboard, about the particular education of being small in a house that wanted you to be nothing, about learning to read rooms and people and motives because the alternative was to be continually blindsided. I had good teachers, he said, just not the official kind. They walked down from the tower together, and the castle listened, and the portraits passed word along from frame to frame, and by the time Harry reached the Gryffindor common room the particular quality of the afternoon felt different. Something shifted, something that had been pressed in one direction for a very long time pressing back. That evening, Harry went back to see the Sorting Hat. He'd been thinking about this since the first night, turning it over, the question of whether the hat was accessible outside the sorting ceremony. It turned out that it was. Flitwick, whom Harry had approached with the question obliquely framed as an interest in Hogwarts history, had mentioned that the hat resided in Dumbledore's office between sortings, but that the founding charter gave every student the right to consult the hat directly once per academic year on matters of house welfare or personal discernment. Harry had used the gargoyle password he'd memorized during the afternoon visit. He'd gone at 9 in the evening, after the rest of Gryffindor had settled into the common room. Fawkes watched him come in without alarm. The hat was on its cushion on the shelf. Harry took it down and put it on. Back so soon, the hat said. I went to see him this afternoon, Harry said, out loud, because it felt less strange than thinking at a hat. Dumbledore. I heard. The portraits are a more efficient communication network than people give them credit for. A pause. How was it? Instructive, Harry said. He said I was extraordinary. You are. That's not a compliment, it's an observation. The hat shifted slightly on his head. What did you want from me? The prophecy, Harry said. You mentioned it the first night. You said it was a trap. I want to know what you meant. I said I wouldn't tell you the contents. I'm not asking for the contents, Harry said. I'm asking about the mechanism. How does a prophecy work? Specifically, how does it get power? Why does it matter what it says? A long pause. The hat seemed to be considering something. Prophecies, it said finally, have no inherent power. They are observations, not instructions. A prophecy is a statement about probability and possibility, made by a seer in a particular state of consciousness. What gives a prophecy power is belief. The moment you act on a prophecy, the moment anyone acts on it, you make it real. Not because it was inevitable, but because actions taken in response to it create the conditions it described. So the only reason the prophecy matters, Harry said slowly, is because Voldemort believed it. And because Dumbledore believed it, the hat said. And because both of them acted on it. A prophecy that nobody hears is just a statement made by someone in a trance. The moment it was acted upon, the moment Voldemort chose your family and Dumbledore chose you, the observation became a plan. And if I choose not to fulfill it? then you are not fulfilling it. The prophecy doesn't compel you. It never could. It could only compel someone who believed it was compulsory. The hat was quiet for a moment. Dumbledore believes, genuinely believes, that you must die at some point in order for Voldemort to be defeated. This is his interpretation of the prophecy. It may even be a technically correct interpretation. But interpretation is not fate. And his method of ensuring you'd be willing to die, the potions, the conditioning, the removal of your capacity to question, that method has failed. Which means he needs a new approach, Harry said. He's been recalibrating since Friday night, the hat confirmed. I want to be clear, he is not giving up. He is not going to stop. He genuinely believes he is right. He has always genuinely believed he is right, and his being right about many things over many decades has made this quality extremely dangerous. A pause. He will try to reach you differently now. He'll try honesty, partial honesty, the kind designed to feel like full honesty. He'll try respect. He'll try to show you the genuine affection he has for you, which is real, by the way. He does care about you. It simply doesn't override his conviction that you're a necessary sacrifice. Harry thought about this. He cares about me and still did all of it. Yes, the hat said. That's what makes him the particular kind of dangerous he is. A man who merely wanted to use you would be simpler to oppose. A man who loves you and wants to use you requires a different kind of thinking. I'm working on it, Harry said. I know, said the hat. You've made a good start. But Harry, there's something else you should know. Something I held back on the first night because I judged you weren't ready for it yet. Harry straightened slightly. Tell me now. Your magical ability, the hat said. The immunity is not the only thing you inherited from your mother. Lily Potter was, in my professional assessment, and I have sorted every witch and wizard through this school for 1,000 years, one of perhaps a dozen people in all that time who possessed what the founders called primal magic. Not just talent, not just power. Something older. Something structural. The hat's voice had changed quality, not dramatic, just precise in a way that made the words land cleanly. You have it too. More of it, actually. The immunity is the surface expression. The primal magic is what's underneath. It's why the compulsion potions failed. It's why your accidental magic as a child was what it was. The teachers at your primary school didn't report you because they thought you were odd. They reported you because you were doing things that genuinely frightened adults. A pause. You haven't accessed most of it deliberately yet. You will. And when you do, I want you to understand what you're working with. Harry sat in the headmaster's empty office, in the dark with the phoenix and the sleeping portraits, and let this settle into him. He thought about the belonging feeling in the great hall. He thought about his needle in transfiguration. He thought about the 11 years of strange things that had happened around him that he'd always dismissed as accidents. How do I access it deliberately? He asked. You already started, the hat said. The moment you stopped performing the part you were assigned and started being what you actually are, that's the beginning of it. Power of that order isn't summoned. It's released. A slight shift. I should also tell you, the independent magical assessment you're requesting. I'd recommend Unspeakable Galatea Marathot's granddaughter. She works private practice now. She's the best external evaluator in Britain and the only one I'd trust to correctly identify what she's measuring. Harry filed the name away. You're very helpful for a hat, he said. I was designed by 4 of the greatest magical minds of the medieval period and have observed more human beings than any other enchanted object in existence, the hat said. I'm not helpful. I'm experienced. Harry took the hat off and put it back on its cushion and stood in the office for a moment. Fawkes made a low sound, not a full trill, something smaller, more conversational. Harry looked at the bird. Fawkes looked back. His eyes were warm and ancient and saw through things, the way birds sometimes seem to, the way living things that had been alive a very long time accumulated a quality of sight that wasn't quite the same as ordinary looking. "I know," Harry said, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing with. He let himself out of the office. In the corridor, descending the tower stairs, Harry felt the information land fully, not just the prophecy and the hat's assessment, but the compound of the last week entire. The cupboard and the potions and the immunity and his mother's blood and his father's name and the game that had been built around him before he was old enough to walk. He stopped on a landing and looked out of a narrow window at the dark Scottish grounds, the lake catching starlight, the edge of the forbidden forest where the trees were simply dark and full of things that didn't concern themselves with wizarding politics. He was 11 years old and he had primal magic in his bones and 500 failed love potions in his blood and a case being built from compound lists and financial records and a forthcoming potions master's confession, and across the castle a man who loved him was reconsidering his approach, and somewhere out in the dark world a fragment of a dark wizard was rebuilding itself in the back of a professor's skull. He knew about Quirrell. He'd felt it the first time Quirrell shook his hand, a specific wrongness, like touching something that was two things at once and wrong about both of them. He hadn't known then what he was feeling. He knew now, the same way he knew other things now, with the clarity of someone who had been given back their own eyes. He'd deal with Quirrell when Quirrell became a problem that needed dealing with. For now, he had a petition to file, an assessment to arrange, a legal case to continue building, and a school to attend. He went back to the common room. Hermione was still up, the only one, sitting by the last of the fire with a book that she lowered when he came through the portrait hole. "How did it go?" she said. Meaning the office, which she knew about because he'd told her. "Well," he said. "And the other thing?" He sat in the chair across from her. "My mother had something called primal magic," he said. "I have it too." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she unfolded from her chair and went to the bookshelf in the corner of the common room, the one with the small, overlooked collection of texts that students left behind between years, and came back with a slim, worn volume. She put it in his hands. Foundational Magic, a Historical Survey, 3rd edition, well thumbed, with penciled annotations that got more frantic toward the middle. "Chapter 7, she said, sitting back down. Harry looked at her. "You already knew what it was." "I suspected," she said. "There are very few things that could produce diagnostic residue that alarmed Pomfrey as much as yours did, and most of them are catastrophic injuries. Yours wasn't an injury. It was more like interference. Like trying to tune a radio that's already receiving a different signal entirely." She paused. Chapter 7. He opened to Chapter 7 and began to read, and the fire burned down, and outside Hogwarts the night was enormous and dark and full of things that were beginning, in various corners of the world, to move. Chapter 4, Primal. The book Hermione had handed him was 212 pages, and Harry read all of it before he slept. Chapter 7 was the relevant one, but the surrounding chapters gave it context, and context was the thing Harry had been missing his entire life, so he read all of it, the historical survey of foundational magic, the documented cases of what the authors called magically aberrant individuals, the medieval accounts of witches and wizards who had operated outside the standard frameworks of wand and will that most magical education assumed. He read with the focused appetite of someone eating after a long fast, and when he finished he sat with the closed book in his lap and the dead fire in front of him and thought. Primal magic, according to the survey, was not a power you learned. It was a condition you were born into. The authors described it as a relationship between a person and magic itself, not magic as a tool, not magic as a skill to be developed through instruction and practice, but magic as something closer to a language that certain rare individuals spoke natively rather than as a learned second tongue. The analogy in Chapter 7 was precise and Harry kept coming back to it. Most witches and wizards were fluent in magic, some were exceptionally fluent, but a primal magic practitioner was someone for whom magic was not a second language at all. It was the first. It was, in some structural sense, the language they thought in. The implications of this were significant. For one thing, it meant that wand work, the standard delivery mechanism for spells, was, for someone like Harry, a translation. He was taking something native and rendering it into a format designed for people who needed the intermediary. The wand still worked. It worked very well. But it was not the limit. It was the container, and the thing inside the container was larger than the container, and had always been larger, and had spent 11 years in a cupboard pressing quietly against the walls. For another thing, it meant that the compulsion potions had never stood a chance. Primal Magic Practitioners, the book noted in a dry academic aside that Harry thought probably deserved more emphasis, were broadly resistant to external magical influences affecting the will or the emotions. Not invulnerable, nothing was invulnerable, but structurally resistant in the same way that a deep foundation resists subsidence. The foundation itself had to be addressed, and the foundation was not addressable through standard compulsion class compounds. His mother had known this about herself. The book had a single reference to Lily Potter by name, in a footnote, of all places, citing a 1977 paper she'd written in her 7th year for an Advanced Charms independent study, titled Resistance Patterns in Compulsion Magic, a personal case study. She'd published it in a small academic journal under her maiden name. She'd been 17. The journal was Quarterly Studies in Magical Theory, and its 1977 autumn edition was available, and the librarian, Madame Pants, who had the specific intensity of someone who had decided books were more reliable than people and had the record to support that position, had produced the relevant issue with only a brief interrogation about Harry's purposes that he'd satisfied by being honest. He'd read his mother's paper standing at the reference desk. It was extraordinary. Not because of what it said about magic, though it was lucid and carefully argued and showed a 17-year-old working through a genuinely novel problem with no obvious roadmap, but because of the person it showed. His mother's voice came through the academic language the way voices sometimes did in old letters, distinct and alive and almost present, with a dry humor in the footnotes and a stubbornness in the main argument that felt like looking in a mirror. She hadn't been afraid of the implications of what she'd found in herself. She'd written it down and published it and put her name on it. He'd stood there at the reference desk reading it and felt something complicated and clean. The letter he wrote Tuesday morning was to Obscura Press, the journal's publisher, requesting a copy of the original manuscript if one existed in their archives. Long shot, but worth trying. Then he wrote a second letter, to a Professor Bathsheba Babbling, who the footnote in the survey book cited as the academic who'd supervised Lily's paper, and who according to the current Hogwarts staff list was still teaching ancient runes. That letter he delivered in person. Professor Babbling was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and the manner of someone who lived primarily in the intellectual world and visited the physical one as required. Her classroom was on the 3rd floor and she was in it at 7:30 preparing for a lesson, surrounded by stones carved with rune sequences, and she looked up when Harry knocked and took approximately 4 seconds to figure out who he was. Harry Potter, she said, not as a celebrity recognition, more like someone identifying a specific variety of cloud formation. Professor, Harry said. I read my mother's paper. She put down the runestone she was holding. Sit down, she said. He sat. She looked at him for a moment with the particular attention of someone who had been waiting for something for a long time and is now performing a rapid comparison between the expectation and the reality. I supervised that paper for 3 months, she said. Your mother came to me in October of her 7th year and said she thought she was unusual in a specific way and wanted to document it properly. Most students would have found it frightening. She found it interesting. A pause. How is your magic presenting so far? Cleanly, Harry said. Too cleanly, probably, for a first year. The transfiguration was quick. Charms is, he thought about how to put it, intuitive. Like being reminded of something rather than learning something. Babbling nodded. Your mother said something similar. She described it as the difference between reading a language and reading your native tongue. Something in the architecture of how you process the intent. She picked up a rune-carved stone and turned it over in her hands. I want to ask you something directly, Harry, because I've read your name in the charter entry and I have some understanding of what happened at the sorting, and I am one of the few people in this school who knew your mother as a practitioner rather than just as a student. Go ahead, Harry said. What are you planning to do with what you have? Be a student, Harry said. Learn. Build things properly. I'm not planning a coup, if that's what you're asking. She smiled, which changed her face considerably. It wasn't what I was asking. I was asking because what you have, what she had, requires a framework. It's not enough to simply be powerful. The primal magic needs to be understood by the person carrying it, or it will find its own expressions, and those expressions aren't always, she paused, choosing, the ones you choose deliberately. That's what I came to talk about, Harry said. The book mentioned something called anchoring. A practice for primal magic practitioners to deliberately engage with their foundational capability rather than just having it happen around them. Yes. She was more alert now. It's an old practice. Pre-Wand era. The four founders all used forms of it, it's why Hogwarts is what it is. They built this school by four people anchoring their primal capabilities to a physical location, which is why the castle responds to magical intent the way it does. It's not enchantments all the way down. At the bottom of it is four people's primal magic, still active, 1,000 years on. Harry looked at the stone walls of her classroom with this information sitting in his mind, and for a moment he felt the castle differently, not just as a building with moving staircases and enchanted ceilings, but as something that had been breathed into, something that had absorbed four people's fundamental selves so completely that the absorption was still ongoing. Can you teach me? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Come back Thursday at 7 in the morning. Before breakfast. Bring your wand, but plan not to use it. A pause. Don't mention this to anyone yet. Not because it's secret, but because early anchoring work requires a quality of attention that's hard to maintain if people are asking you about it. Harry nodded and stood, and was at the door when Babbling said, she would have been delighted by you. I want you to know that. He turned around. Looked at her. Thank you, he said, and meant it entirely. The petition went in Wednesday morning. Hermione had made 3 revisions to the draft since Sunday, each one tightening a clause or adding a citation, and Harry had read each revision and approved them with small adjustments of his own, and the final version was 9 pages of precise, well-sourced, legally grounded argument that requested 3 specific things: independent guardianship review, full disclosure of any prophecies naming Harry James Potter, and an independent magical assessment by an external evaluator. For the evaluator, Harry had included the name the Sorting Hat had suggested, Arabella Merithot, private practice, granddaughter of former defense professor Galatea Merithot. Harry had sent her a separate letter 2 days prior and received a brief, professional response indicating availability and a standard rate for independent assessments. The petition went to Madame Bones via Ministry Owl, with copies to the Board of Governors and, as required by statute, to the Hogwarts headmaster's office as interested party. Harry watched the owls go and felt the satisfaction of things in motion. Ron was beside him at the Ollery window, watching the birds diminish against the grey Scottish sky. He'd been quieter than usual since Monday, carrying something, and Harry had been waiting to see if he'd bring it himself rather than pushing. My dad knows Arthur Weasley, Ron said, at the Ollery window, which was such an odd sentence construction that Harry turned to look at him. I mean, my dad is Arthur Weasley. I mean. He stopped. Exhaled. My dad works at the Ministry. Misuse of Muggle artifacts. I've been thinking about whether to write to him. About what specifically? Harry asked. The disbursements, Ron said. The Gringotts audit. He turned away from the window. My family gets by, yeah. We don't have a lot. And there have been a few times over the years where suddenly something worked out. The car got fixed. The house didn't fall down when it should have. Percy got his prefect badge and somehow his dress robes were new. He said this without self-pity, just cataloging. I always thought it was just luck. Our family has a kind of mad luck. But now I'm thinking about people who use other people's money for things they call charitable. Harry held his gaze. I don't think your father knew, he said. I don't either, Ron said. But I want to know where it came from. He picked at a stone in the Ollery wall. It'll upset him. My dad thinks, he's always really admired, he stopped. He can admire someone and also know the truth about them, Harry said. Those don't have to cancel each other out. Ron was quiet for a moment. You're very sordid, for someone who just found out their whole life was a setup. I've had a lot of practice being the only calm person in a room, Harry said. Comes from having nobody else to rely on. Ron looked at him with the honest, slightly uncomfortable expression of someone genuinely seeing something for the first time. Right, he said. I keep forgetting what your home situation actually was. Don't forget, Harry said. Just don't feel bad about it. It's done. Ron wrote to his father that evening. Harry knew because Ron asked to borrow his good quill, which Harry lent without asking why, and which Ron returned an hour later looking lighter for the decision. Thursday morning, Harry was in Babbling's classroom at 7:10. She had cleared the center of the room and placed 4 objects at compass points around the empty space, a stone, a bowl of water, a lit candle, and a small bundle of dried herbs. Harry looked at these and then at her and she said, Don't read into the symbolism too hard. They're anchors for the practice, not metaphysics. Understood, Harry said. Stand in the center. Leave your wand in your bag. He did both. The room was quiet and cool, the early morning light coming in gray from the high windows, the castle making its low subterranean sounds around them. Most magical instruction, Babbling said, moving around the perimeter of the circle, starts from the outside in. Here is a spell. Here is the wand movement. Here is the incantation. You learn the form and hope the power follows. She stopped at the north point. What we're doing is the reverse. We're starting from what you actually are and building outward from there. So the first thing I want you to do is nothing. Harry stood in the center of the room and did nothing. Not nothing in the sense of absence, she said. Nothing in the sense of attention without direction. You're not trying to feel anything or do anything. You're just present. In the space. As what you are. He tried this. It was harder than it sounded, because the mind wanted to do something with attention, wanted to point it somewhere useful. He let that impulse pass and tried again. The room. The stone floor under his feet. The cool air. The sound of the castle. Something shifted. It was subtle, a change in quality rather than something visible, like the moment your eyes adjust in a dark room and the dark begins to resolve into shapes. The air around him felt different. Not charged, not dramatic, not like anything he'd read in books about magic. Just, present. The same way he was present. Mutually aware. There, Babbling said quietly. Stay in that. He stayed in it. It was not comfortable, exactly, it required a quality of attention that was effortful in the way that holding very still is effortful. But it was not difficult either, and as the minutes passed it became less effortful and more natural, like finding a note on a scale and sustaining it. What do you notice? She asked. The castle, he said. It's present. Like it's aware. It is, she said. You're touching the same layer that the founders built from. Your mother could do this by her 6th year. You're doing it on your first try. She didn't say this with dramatic emphasis, just stated it as data. This is the foundation. This is what you are before the wand, before the spell, before the instruction. This is the thing that has been trying to express itself since you were 18 months old and couldn't be contained by a love potion because it was simply too fundamental to be addressed that way. Harry stood in the center of the room with the castle alive around him and felt, for the first time in his life, precisely his own size. He did not feel large, especially. He didn't feel powerful in the way he'd imagined power when he was younger, not like a weapon or a force. He felt, quite simply, like what he actually was, and what he actually was turned out to be enough, and more than enough, and the more than enough was not threatening or overwhelming but simply the natural condition of being Lily Potter's son with Lily Potter's magic in a building that had been waiting for someone like him for a very long time. Again tomorrow, Babbling said. Same time. He came back every morning that week. Friday afternoon, the Gryffindors had flying. Harry had been looking forward to this with a specific anticipation that he'd kept to himself, because there was no rational reason for an 11-year-old who had never been on a broom to be quietly certain that he was going to be good at it, and yet he was quietly certain, and on some level he knew why. Madam Hooch had them stand beside their brooms, and Harry's broom came up on the first try while half the class was still struggling, and he noted this without comment and waited. Neville's broom misbehaved. Neville went up before Hooch had given the signal, and the broom was wrong from the start, a series of lurching spirals that carried him higher and higher and then pitched him off 30 feet above the ground. In the half-second before everyone else fully processed what was happening, Harry had already made two decisions, that Neville was going to hit the ground if nobody moved now, and that he was the only person close enough to the broom situation who could reasonably do something about it. He went. He kicked off the ground and the broom did exactly what he'd known it would do, which was respond to him completely, and he was 20 feet off the ground and moving in the time it took most people to inhale. The trajectory to Neville was simple geometry. Harry tracked it without thinking, adjusting his angle with the casual precision of someone who had been doing this in their bones for years and was only now doing it with their body. He pulled Neville level at 12 feet, caught him by the back of his robes, and brought him down slowly. He set Neville on his feet on the grass and Neville looked up at him with an expression that was trying to be grateful and kept threatening to become something else entirely. "You all right?" Harry asked. "Yeah," Neville said. "That was, thank you." He paused. "How did you do that?" "Good broom," Harry said simply, and touched down. The class was staring. Hooch was staring. Draco Malfoy was staring with an expression that had started as contempt and arrived somewhere more complicated, because Draco Malfoy was not, whatever his other qualities, stupid, and what he'd just watched was not the kind of flying that needed explanation. Then Malfoy picked up something that had fallen from Neville's pocket during the accident, a Remembrall, glass ball with a red center, and held it up. "I'll leave this somewhere Longbottom can't reach it," he said, and kicked off. Harry watched him go. He'd been expecting something like this. Malfoy had been looking for a moment to establish something since the first day, with the particular calculation of someone who needed to know where everyone stood. Harry understood this because he'd spent years reading rooms and this was not a complicated room. He got back on his broom. He went after Malfoy with no particular urgency, just a straight line and the knowledge that there was no version of this where Malfoy was faster. The other boy looked back when he heard Harry coming and there was a flash of genuine surprise before the performance of contempt reasserted itself. Malfoy was a good flyer, competent and confident and used to being the best in any given space. Harry came alongside him at 60 feet and kept pace effortlessly, which made Malfoy's jaw tighten. "Going somewhere?" Harry said. "Get away from me, Potter. Give Neville his Remembrall back and I will." Malfoy looked at him sideways. They were level and Harry was not chasing him, was simply present beside him, unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world and Harry was comfortable with however long this took. It was, Malfoy clearly recognized, an unusual quality in someone who'd ask for something back. "Or what?" Malfoy said. "Or nothing," Harry said. "There's no threat here. I just want the Remembrall. You're not going to hex me? Chase me? I thought Gryffindors were supposed to." "I don't need to chase you," Harry said. "I'm already next to you." A silence. They flew parallel over the Hogwarts grounds, the castle below them, the lake catching the afternoon light. Malfoy looked at Harry with an expression that was performing the wrong emotion, performing contempt over something that was closer to consideration. "You're not like I expected," Malfoy said, abruptly. "What did you expect?" "Something more." He gestured vaguely with the hand not holding the Remembrall. "Heroic. Loud about it." I'm not performing anything, Harry said. Malfoy looked at him for another moment. Then, without making a production of it, he held out the Remembrall. Harry took it. You're a better flyer than anyone down there thinks you are, Malfoy said, as if this were an irritating fact he'd decided to acknowledge. So are you, Harry said, which was also true. He flew back down and returned Neville's Remembrall and said nothing about the conversation to anyone, but he turned it over in his mind for the rest of the afternoon, because Malfoy was not going to be simple, and simple was not the same thing as unimportant. A Malfoy who was contemptuous was predictable. A Malfoy who was considering was something else. The response to the petition came faster than Harry expected. He'd anticipated a month, maybe 6 weeks, the standard ministry pace. On Friday evening, 8 days after filing, McGonagall came to the common room and asked to speak with Harry privately and handed him a sealed envelope with the ministry seal. He opened it in the corridor outside the portrait hole. The petition had been granted. All 3 elements. Amelia Bones' signature was at the bottom, and the language was formal but clear: independent guardianship review scheduled for October 15, to be conducted by ministry-appointed examiner. Independent magical assessment by Arabella Merithod approved and scheduled for October 20, disclosure of prophecy records pertaining to Harry James Potter, this one with a specific notation, subject to review by the Unspeakables, disclosure timeline to be determined, not to exceed 90 days. The last page was a separate document, smaller, on different letterhead. It was an emergency protective order filed under the Magical Minors Protection Act, issued pending the guardianship review, which stated that any administration of compulsion class magical substances to Harry James Potter was now a criminal offense with an immediate arrest provision. Harry read this page twice. McGonagall was watching him with careful attention. They moved quickly, she said. Madame Bones did, Harry said. She's thorough. The protective order is significant, McGonagall said. It has immediate effect. No appeal window before it activates. Good, Harry said, and put the documents in his bag. McGonagall looked at him with the expression she'd been developing over the past week, the one that was still partly trying to reconcile what she'd known of Harry with what she was now seeing, and partly something simpler, the expression of someone who had made a choice to be present and was following through on it. Is there anything you need? Not tonight, Harry said. He thought for a moment. Actually, yes. The flying today. Hooch mentioned that if there'd been a teacher present it would have triggered an automatic referral to the Quidditch captain. It would have, she said. And I was not, she paused. I was not present today. However, if I were to speak to the captain about what Madame Hooch reported, I'm not trying to get on the Quidditch team, Harry said. I'm not saying I'd turn it down. But that's not what I was asking. She waited. The flying, Harry said. It felt right. I just wanted to tell someone that. It felt like one more thing that was actually mine. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the specific quality of a person choosing precisely the right weight of words, your father was the best natural flyer I've seen in 30 years of teaching. Your mother cheered for him so loudly at Quidditch that I once asked her to move away from the staff section. A pause. The flying is yours, Harry. It was always going to be yours. He nodded. He went back through the portrait hole. Later that night, Neville came and sat next to him by the fire. Harry was rereading Babbling's notes from their Thursday session, the ones he'd written up afterward in his own words, anchoring them. The anchoring worked better when he wrote things down, he'd found, the act of translating the experience into language giving it a kind of permanence. Neville sat beside him and waited until Harry looked up. I wrote to my Gran, Neville said. Harry waited. Told her about the petition. About the legal processes. He paused. She cried. She rang me after, he stopped, reorganizing. She sent me a letter that afternoon. She said, another pause, and his voice had the careful deliberateness of someone carrying precise words from one place to another without dropping them. She said she's been waiting for someone to do this for 9 years. She said she didn't think she could do it herself because she was afraid. She said she hopes you'll let her help. I will, Harry said. Neville exhaled. She also said that the letter she burned, she remembers the specific date. And the specific wording. She has a very precise memory, my gran. She could provide a statement about the letter's contents even without the physical document. Harry thought about this. About an old woman who had burned a piece of evidence 9 years ago because she'd been afraid and alone and grieving, and who had carried the knowledge of it since, and who was now, via her grandson on a Friday evening in a Gryffindor common room, offering the thing she had. Tell her yes, Harry said. Tell her thank you. Neville nodded. He looked at the fire. You're building something, he said. Aren't you? Not just the legal case. Something else. Harry considered the question seriously. The fire crackled. Across the room Ron was playing chess with Seamus, narrating his own moves with the cheerful self-commentary of someone who was winning and knew it. I'm building the thing that should have been built before, Harry said. Just, actually. Without the false premise underneath it. He paused. People who matter having real information. Real choices. A foundation that doesn't have a lie at the center. That's a large project, Neville said. Yes, Harry said. But the alternative is someone else building it for us, and I've seen what that looks like. Neville was quiet for a moment, and then said, I'm in, with the same deliberate finality he'd used in the corridor that first week, the voice of someone who had made a decision and intended to keep it. Harry nodded. Outside, the castle breathed. The fire burned. Somewhere above them, a man with a silver beard sat in his circular office in the company of his phoenix and the sleeping portraits, and he was reading the petition response that had arrived in his office as required by statute, and he was sitting with it very carefully, performing the equanimity of a man who was not rattled because rattled men made poor decisions. But his hands, on the desk, were pressed flat against the surface in the particular way of someone maintaining stillness through force, and the phoenix watched him with its ancient eyes and made no sound. Saturday arrived with the specific quality of a day that has made its mind up to be significant. Harry woke up early, went to Babbling's classroom. She didn't have a formal lesson scheduled but the room was open and she told him to use it when needed, and did an hour of anchoring work. He was getting faster at finding the state now, the quality of mutual attention between himself and the castle. It was becoming less like a technique and more like a register, a frequency he could shift into when the situation called for it. He was finishing up, bag on his shoulder, when he felt it. He'd felt it before, the wrongness of Quirrell, the two things at once quality. But this was close, and strong, and coming toward him, and it was not just wrong in the ordinary sense but wrong in the way that things are wrong when something genuinely opposed to you is in proximity. Quirrell came through the classroom door. He was in his turban and his habitual expression of mild, stuttering anxiety, and he looked at Harry with the anxiety fully operational, and behind the anxiety, visible from where Harry stood in the centered register of the anchoring state, visible in the same way that the castle was visible when he was paying proper attention, was something that was not Quirrell at all. P. Potter, Quirrell said. I was looking for Professor Babbling, she's not here, Harry said. He didn't move. Quirrell's eyes moved around the room. Are you alone? Yes, Harry said. The anxiety shifted. The stuttering quality smoothed slightly, involuntarily, the way someone's posture changes when they think no one's watching. You've been very busy, Quirrell said. Petitions. Legal processes. You're causing quite a stir. I expect I am, Harry said. It might be wise, Quirrell said, to consider the larger picture. There are forces at work that, he stopped. Something moved behind his eyes, something that was not Quirrell deliberating over a sentence. Something that was deciding how directly to speak. There are forces, Quirrell said, more smoothly, who have interests in you, that go beyond what Dumbledore has described. Forces who have been watching you with considerable interest. I know, Harry said. Quirrell went still. "I know you're not alone in there," Harry said. "And whoever's listening through you, I want them to know that I'm aware of them, and I don't have an enemy relationship with them by default. I have a complicated relationship with Dumbledore. That doesn't automatically make me an ally of anyone Dumbledore opposes." He held Quirrell's gaze, or rather held the gaze of whatever was looking through Quirrell's eyes. "If there's something to discuss, there's a better method than this one." The room was very quiet. Then Quirrell's expression did something that had nothing to do with Professor Quirrell, a sharp, animal attention, like a predator encountering something unexpected in territory it thought it knew. And through that attention Harry felt the particular pressure of something very old and very powerful deciding what to make of an 11-year-old who had just spoken to it directly without flinching. "Interesting," said Quirrell, in a voice that was no longer Quirrell's. "Yes," Harry said. "I expect it is." The voice said nothing else. Quirrell's face reassembled itself into the anxiety, and he made his excuses, and he left, and Harry stood in the empty classroom with the castle around him and breathed evenly. That was information. Not comfortable information, but information. Voldemort's fragment had expected fear and received none, had expected a child and found something that met its gaze, and it was, Harry was almost certain, reassessing. Whether that reassessment would produce something dangerous or something that could be worked with was not yet clear. He noted that he'd been honest when he said he didn't have an automatic enemy relationship with Voldemort. He had an enemy relationship with the man who had killed his parents. What Voldemort had become, and what that remnant was, and whether there was any version of events where this ended without the final simplicity of a permanent opposition, these were questions he wasn't ready to foreclose on yet. He kept thinking. He went to breakfast. He ate with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and the morning moved around them with the ordinary momentum of a school day. Someone had lost a textbook, someone's owl had eaten someone else's letter, Seamus had managed to set his eyebrows on fire in a solo charms practice that the whole common room had opinions about, and Harry sat in the middle of it and let it be ordinary, because ordinary was valuable, because ordinary was the texture of the thing he was building. Later that afternoon, he went back to the Ollery alone and wrote one more letter. This one was short. It went to Augusta Longbottom. It thanked her for her willingness to provide a statement. It told her, briefly, that her son and her daughter-in-law had been failed by people who should have protected them, and that this failure was going to be part of the formal record, and that she should not carry the burning of the letter as something that diminished what she'd done since. Then it said that her grandson was remarkable, and that Harry was glad to know him, and that the qualities Frank and Alice had passed on had survived everything that had been done to erase them. He sealed the letter and watched the owl take it. The October sky was enormous and grey and clean, and the Scottish hills in the distance were the colour of something old and unhurried, and Hogwarts below him spread its towers and its stones with the particular permanence of something that had been built to last, that had four people's fundamental selves breathed into its foundations, that had been here for 1,000 years and intended to be here for 1,000 more. He felt, standing in the Ollery window, the castle's awareness, the same mutual presence he'd found in Babbling's classroom, but bigger here, wider, looking outward the way the castle looked outward when there was something worth looking at. "I know," he told it, which was not a rational thing to tell a building, and which felt completely reasonable anyway. He went back inside, and the tower door closed behind him, and the day moved toward evening. Chapter 5, The Game Beneath the Game. October arrived and tightened the air. The mountains around Hogwarts went from green to amber to the particular red-brown of something finishing, and the lake turned from grey-blue to a deeper grey, and the castle exhaled cold in the mornings like it was reminding itself what season it was. Harry had been at Hogwarts for 5 weeks. In that time he had learned to anchor, built a legal case, filed a petition, initiated a Gringotts audit, sent 17 letters, read his mother's academic paper 4 times, established 3 separate intelligence streams, the twins, McGonagall's increasingly candid willingness to answer direct questions, and Snape's notes, which continued arriving at irregular intervals with the reliability of things that cost the sender something, and attended every single one of his classes. He'd also, almost incidentally, been put on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Wood had come to find him with the expression of someone delivering news too good to be casual about, and Harry had said yes because the flying was his and he intended to do everything that was his properly, and because Quidditch practice gave him 2 legitimate evenings a week to be outside the castle in the air without needing a reason. He was returning from one of those practices, broom over his shoulder, hair worse than usual from the wind, when Fred Weasley appeared from behind a suit of armor in the second-floor corridor and fell into step beside him without announcement. "We have something," Fred said. "Good something or bad something?" Harry asked. "Interesting something." He passed Harry a folded piece of parchment without breaking stride. "Last Tuesday. Closed-door meeting, Dumbledore's office, 3 attendees besides Dumbledore. We got names off Peeves, who was listening through the ventilation the entire time because Peeves does not respect privacy as a concept." Harry unfolded the parchment and read the 3 names while walking. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Marcus Belby, Chair of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. He folded the parchment back up. "Do you know what they discussed?" "Peeves caught fragments," Fred said. "He's not systematic about it." But the words he heard in order were, overreach, minor, destabilizing influence, appropriate intervention, and, a pause, temporary removal. Harry walked for a moment without speaking. "Temporary removal," he said. "Of you, presumably," Fred said, without inflection. "From Hogwarts. They'd need a framing. Welfare concern, maybe. Or psychological instability following traumatic disclosure. Something that sounds like care." "Something that sounds like care," Harry said. "Yes." Fred glanced at him. "You're not alarmed?" "I'm informed," Harry said. "There's a difference." He thought for a moment. "The Board of Governors has no authority to remove a student without a formal process. That process requires written documentation, a hearing, and, under the 1912 Act, independent representation for the student if they're a minor." He paused. "Fudge being there is the concerning part. If the Ministry moves to frame this as a welfare intervention rather than a school matter, the process changes." "Can they do that?" "They can try," Harry said. He looked at the parchment one more time and put it in his bag. "Tell George thank you. And tell Peeves," he stopped. "What does Peeves want?" Fred looked surprised that he'd asked. "Honestly? He likes chaos. He likes being useful to chaos. We think he's been bored. The kind of bored that happens when you're very good at something and no one's giving you interesting problems. Tell him I appreciate the specific quality of chaos he's providing," Harry said, "and that there will be more interesting problems." Fred smiled, the real one underneath the performative one. "Right," he said. "He'll like that." He peeled off at the next corridor junction and Harry went to the common room and sat by the fire and thought about Fudge and Umbridge and a board chair and the word temporary removal and the speed with which people with institutional power moved when they felt the institution threatened. Hermione arrived 20 minutes later with the expression of someone who had been at the library and had found something while there. She sat across from him. "Did you know," she said, "that the Minister for Magic has a discretionary welfare power under the 1954 Magical Children's Protection Act that allows him to temporarily remove a magical minor from their primary residence or educational placement if he determines there's an immediate welfare risk." "When did you start looking at that?" Harry asked. "Tuesday," she said. He looked at her. "How did you know to look Tuesday?" "I didn't. I've been doing systematic research across every statute that affects magical minors and I hit it Tuesday afternoon." She paused. "Why? Is Tuesday significant?" "Tuesday is when the meeting happened," Harry said. They looked at each other. "They're planning to use the welfare power," Hermione said. "Not a question." "They're planning to try," Harry said. "The problem with the welfare power is the word immediate. He needs to demonstrate an immediate welfare risk. The protective order Bones issued already establishes that my welfare is being formally monitored and protected by the MLE. Using the minister's welfare power in the presence of an active Emily protective order would require Fudge to make the argument that Bones' order is insufficient, effectively arguing against his own department's action. Hermione was quiet for a moment, running this through her internal legal structure. He could claim new evidence of risk. Something that post-dates the protective order. He could manufacture something, Harry said. Which is why I want documentation of my welfare from as many independent sources as possible between now and the October 15th guardianship hearing. He thought. Babbling's seen me twice a week for a month. Pomfrey can document that I've presented as healthy and functioning. Wood can speak to regular practice attendance. McGonagall has regular contact. He paused. It needs to be submitted before they move. If it's already on record when they make their play, they're arguing against existing documentation rather than creating a first impression. I can draft the submission, Hermione said. I know you can, Harry said. Thursday. Wednesday, she said, slightly offended by the extra day. He nodded. Outside, the wind pushed against the Gryffindor Tower windows and the fire leaned in its grate, and Harry thought about chess and about the difference between responding to moves and anticipating them, and about the fact that someone had spent 11 years moving him around a board under the assumption he couldn't see the board, and about how much easier it was to play when you could see the whole thing. Wednesday evening, Snape's next note arrived. It came through the same channel, a correction in class, a note left under an ingredient tray, but the content was different this time. Previous notes had been information, compound names, financial trails, offers of testimony. This one was a warning. Umbridge has been in contact with the Potions Guild regarding compound provenance. She is attempting to identify the source of the restricted compounds independently, using the list from Pomfrey's diagnostic. She will reach the Edinburgh laboratory within the week. If she reaches them before the formal MLE investigation does, she will have the opportunity to influence what they disclose. The formal investigation needs to get there first. This requires acceleration. I have submitted my statement to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, as promised. Statement reference, MLE/7742/91. You may cite this. Harry read it twice and then went, without stopping, directly to the Olary. He wrote to Madame Bones, citing Snape's statement reference and asking, briefly, whether the Edinburgh laboratory could be included in the existing preliminary inquiry as an urgent witness. He wrote it carefully, not demanding, not alarmed, just adding a piece of information to an ongoing process and indicating its time sensitivity. He sent it and stood in the October night air for a moment. Umbridge. He'd been expecting her to be involved since Fred's note. She was the kind of person who appeared in exactly these situations, the ones where institutions felt threatened and needed someone willing to do the particular work of making inconvenient things go away cleanly. He'd read about her in passing in a ministry reference book in the library, career bureaucrat, 20 years in the ministry, a record of involvement in a series of educational interventions in the late 80s that the book described as significant policy implementations and that Harry suspected were something else when described honestly. He didn't underestimate her. That was the important thing. The impulse, when you encountered someone doing something obviously wrong, was to assume they were stupid about it. Umbridge was not stupid. She was the kind of intelligence that made her dangerous in a specific way, the intelligence of someone who understood institutional power completely and had spent 20 years learning exactly which levers moved which mechanisms. The response from Bones arrived the next morning. It was brief. The Edinburgh laboratory had been contacted the previous evening. A formal witness preservation order had been issued. The laboratory's records were now under MLE hold, which meant no one, including Umbridge, including anyone from the ministry operating outside the formal investigation, could access or influence them without triggering an obstruction charge. At the bottom of Bones' letter, in handwriting slightly different from the formal text above, as if added after, "You have good instincts. Keep using them." Harry put the letter away and went to Babbling's classroom for his morning session. October 15th arrived clear and cold. The guardianship hearing was not held at Hogwarts. It was held at the Ministry of Magic, in a small conference room on level 2, and Harry traveled there by ministry escort, a young official named Perkins who was clearly trying very hard to be neutral and kept almost starting sentences he then stopped, which Harry suspected meant he had opinions about the situation and had been told not to express them. McGonagall came with him. She had not been asked to come and she had not asked permission. She had simply informed Harry Monday morning that she would be accompanying him and had produced, when Perkins tried to gently query this at the departure point, a 12-paragraph citation of the 1912 Act's representation provisions that ended the conversation definitively. The ministry was enormous and slightly overwhelming in the way of institutions that had been added to haphazardly over centuries, each department accumulating floor space with the organic urgency of things that believed their own importance. Harry moved through it with his eyes open, cataloguing and assessing, the atrium with its fountain of magical brethren, the lift with its clanking grills, the levels announced in a cool recorded voice, the faces of ministry workers who clocked him in various ways as he passed. The conference room was small and beige and had the quality of a space designed to make people feel like nothing important was happening, which Harry recognized as a design choice rather than an accident. 3 ministry officials sat on one side of a long table. Perkins directed Harry and McGonagall to chairs on the other side. Harry sat. He did not find the beige conference room intimidating. He'd sat in the cupboard under the stairs for 10 years, his tolerance for small, dim, institutional spaces was well established. The lead examiner introduced herself as Clotilde Marchbanks, related to the Wizarding Examinations Authority head by marriage, with 40 years in magical family services. She was a small woman with a very straight spine and the expression of someone who had heard every version of every story and was waiting to see which one this was. Harry answered her questions directly and completely. Yes, he understood the purpose of the hearing. Yes, he had reviewed the petition. Yes, he was asking for a formal review of the guardianship authorization granted to Albus Dumbledore in November 1981. His reasons were documented in the petition and the supporting materials, which he had brought in a folder that he laid on the table between them. Marchbanks picked up the folder and looked through it with the meticulous attention of someone who had learned never to rush her own reading regardless of how many people were in the room. Harry waited. He was good at waiting. The second official, a younger man named Croft, leaned forward when Marchbanks reached the Gringotts audit. "The disbursements," he said. "You're alleging these were unauthorized." "I'm not alleging anything," Harry said. "The authorization document is in the folder. Its scope is clearly defined. The disbursements marked in yellow fall outside that scope. The ones marked in red use my own trust funds to pay for substances administered to me without my knowledge or consent." Croft looked at Marchbanks. Marchbanks looked at the documents. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I want to be clear about what a guardianship review can and cannot accomplish. This hearing determines whether the existing authorization remains appropriate and in your best interests." "It does not, I understand the scope," Harry said. "I'm not asking for criminal proceedings at this stage. I'm asking for the authorization to be formally reviewed, suspended pending that review, and replaced with an independent guardian arrangement that doesn't involve anyone currently under investigation by the MLE." He paused. "The protective order issued by Madame Bones provides the legal context. What I need from this hearing is the formal suspension of the authorization so that no one can argue the current arrangement is still operative while the investigation proceeds." The third official had not spoken. He was older, heavy-set, with the specific expression of someone who had been in the building long enough to have opinions about everything and the judgment to share very few of them. He said, without preamble, "You've prepared for this hearing." "Yes," Harry said. "Most 11-year-olds brought to a ministry hearing are accompanied by their guardian," he said. "Who speaks on their behalf?" "Most 11-year-olds don't have the specific situation I have," Harry said. "The petition asked that I be allowed to speak on my own behalf. That was granted." "Yes." Statement of account audit, submitted with the formal notification October 9th. "Good," Tyne said, and looked at Marchbanks. "I don't see grounds to delay." Marchbanks considered the folder for another moment. Then she looked at Harry. The authorization dated November 1981 is hereby placed under formal review and suspended pending the outcome of MLE inquiry MLE/7742/91 and associated matters. Interim guardianship will be assigned to, she checked a document of her own, the Hogwarts Board of Academic Welfare, pending identification of a suitable independent guardian. That's acceptable, Harry said. Do you have any questions? 1, Harry said. The interim arrangement, does it affect my enrollment status at Hogwarts? No, Marchbank said. And it affects Dumbledore's formal standing as my guardian? Completely, she said. As of today, his authorization is suspended. He has no legal standing to make decisions on your behalf. Harry nodded. Thank you, he said, and meant it. McGonagall said nothing in the lift going up, nothing in the atrium, nothing until they were outside in the October air of London. Then she said, quietly, you've been planning this specific sequence for weeks, haven't you? Since the second morning, Harry said. The guardianship had to come before the assessment, and the assessment had to come before anything more formal. The order matters. He looked at her. Did I do something wrong? No, she said, sharply enough to make clear that wasn't the question. She paused. You're 11. Everyone keeps, I know, she said. I know everyone keeps saying it. I keep saying it because it astonishes me every single time. She looked at him with the complicated expression she'd been developing since the first week, the one with too many things in it to name. Your mother was like this, she said. Not the same, she was warmer about it, faster to show what she was feeling. But the quality of it. The way she understood the whole thing, all at once, and moved through it systematically without losing track of any piece. A pause. I miss her, she said, which was a thing she clearly hadn't planned to say and which landed between them with the particular weight of things that are true and rarely spoken. Harry looked at the London street. At the red buses and the grey sky and the ordinary Tuesday morning city moving around the unremarkable red telephone box they'd arrived and would depart from. I think I would have liked her, he said. I think we would have got on. You would have argued constantly, McGonagall said. It would have been magnificent. They went back through the telephone box, and the ministry swallowed them, and the lift descended, and Harry thought about his mother and felt the particular texture of that thought, not grief, exactly, or not only grief, but something fuller, a sense of lineage, of things passed forward that were worth passing. The October 20th assessment went differently from everything that had preceded it. Arabella Merithod arrived at Hogwarts with a traveling case, a quiet assistant who said nothing and noted everything, and the manner of someone who had been doing this work for 30 years and was neither impressed by famous names nor discomfited by unusual findings. She set up in a ground-floor classroom that had been vacated for the day, thanked McGonagall for the space and politely but clearly indicated she needed the room empty of everyone else, and spent the first 20 minutes of Harry's assessment session simply talking to him. Not about magic. About him. What he found easy. What he found hard. What happened when he was frustrated or frightened. What the anchoring work with babbling had been like. Whether he heard the castle. You hear it, she said, at that last question, noting something on her parchment. Yes, Harry said. Is that unusual? For someone 5 weeks into their formal magical education? She looked up from the parchment. Yes. Quite. Then she tested him. She was methodical about it, starting from standard first-year benchmarks and moving upward until she found where his ceiling was, except she didn't find a ceiling, which he could tell was not the expected outcome because her assistant began writing faster at a certain point and didn't stop. She tested charms, transfiguration, defensive magic, compulsion resistance, elemental response, and a category she called ambient magical integration that Harry had not heard of but that corresponded to something like the anchoring state, the quality of being present within magical space in a way that was structural rather than performative. At the end of 2 hours, she put her wand down and looked at her notes and then looked at him. I want to share my findings with you directly, she said. Not a summary. The actual findings. Please, Harry said. She told him. Her assessment placed him, on standard scales, between 4th and 5th year for charms and transfiguration. She said this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone giving a temperature reading, not as a compliment. His compulsion resistance registered as complete, not merely high, not merely resistant, but complete, the scale's upper limit, the first time in her career she'd recorded a full-spectrum result. His ambient magical integration registered in a category she called foundational, which she explained meant that his relationship with the ambient magic of his environment was not the standard practitioner relationship of use and direction but something closer to membership. He was not, she said carefully, a user of magic. He was, in a structural and probably permanent sense, part of it. This is what the term primal magic describes, she said. And I want to be specific about what that means practically, because I think you need this information and I suspect you haven't had it stated plainly. She put her notes down. You will not hit a traditional ceiling in your magical development. Most witches and wizards develop to a natural limit that they can refine and extend through practice but cannot fundamentally exceed. You don't have that limit. What you have instead is depth. The more you engage with what you actually are, the more of it there is to engage with. It's not unlimited in any mystical sense. It's unlimited in the sense that it's connected to something that was here before you and will be here after you, and your access to that connection is not something that can be exhausted or capped. She paused. The anchoring work you're doing with Professor Babbling is exactly right. It's the correct framework for what you are. Harry sat with this for a moment. The assessment results. Who receives them? You do. A copy goes to the MLE as per the petition terms. A copy goes to your school as record. And a copy goes to whoever you designate. She met his eyes. I want to note that these results, if made part of a formal legal record, significantly complicate any argument that you require protective removal or intervention. What I'm documenting today is a magically stable, exceptionally capable minor who is operating well within healthy parameters. I'd like to designate Madame Bones as an additional recipient, Harry said. Done, she said. Anything else? Harry thought about the meeting Peeves had overheard. Temporary removal. Destabilizing influence. He thought about Umbridge and the Edinburgh Laboratory and the Board of Governors and the speed at which institutional power moved when it wanted to. Can you complete your report within 48 hours? He asked. She looked at him. Is timing significant? I believe there may be a welfare intervention attempt coming in the next 2 weeks, Harry said. I would like your findings on record before it materializes. She looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of someone who had assessed a great many people and was doing a particular kind of assessment now that wasn't on any parchment. Report will be with Madame Bones within 24 hours, she said. I'll cite expedited delivery due to active legal proceedings. Thank you, Harry said. She was already writing. Don't thank me, Mr. Potter. Just keep doing what you're doing. The assessment is a formality, you clearly don't need my validation. She didn't look up from the parchment. The report is for the people who do. The intervention attempt came 9 days later. It arrived as a letter, ministry letterhead, Fudge's signature, delivered to the headmaster's office rather than to Harry directly, which was itself informative. It cited the minister's discretionary welfare power under the 1954 Act. It cited concerns about a minor being exposed to ongoing legal proceedings of significant complexity. It proposed, in the language of smoothed-over institutional care, that Harry James Potter be temporarily transferred to a ministry-approved residential assessment facility pending the outcome of the various proceedings. Harry knew about it because McGonagall came to find him in the charms corridor between classes, and her expression told him the nature of the news before she'd said a word. She handed him a copy of the letter. He read it standing in the corridor, students flowing around them. The headmaster received this 20 minutes ago, she said. I was in his office for another reason when it arrived. He shared it with me. She paused. I believe he shared it with me intentionally. Harry looked up from the letter. Did he? He said, McGonagall said carefully, that the letter was irregular and that he wanted my assessment of the appropriate response. She met Harry's eyes. He said, and I am quoting precisely, that some processes, once set in motion, develop a momentum that can be difficult to redirect even for those who initiated them. Harry folded the letter. He thought about this, about a man who had spent months being outmaneuvered by an 11-year-old, and who had just received evidence that the forces he'd mobilized had moved past the point where he could control them, and who had chosen to share that evidence with the person most likely to act on it effectively. He's throwing fudge under the carriage, Harry said. I think, McGonagall said, that he is trying to separate himself from the intervention attempt before it fails, which he has clearly calculated it will fail. She looked at him. What do you need? 15 minutes and an owl, Harry said. She walked with him to the Ollery. He drafted the letter on the way, writing while walking, which he'd gotten good at. The letter to Bones was brief. The welfare intervention had been filed as predicted, it cited the 1954 Act welfare power, the grounds were manifestly insufficient given the existing MLE protective order and Merithot's assessment, and Harry requested that the MLE formally notify the minister's office within the hour that the welfare power could not be invoked in the presence of an active protective order without a Wisengamot override, which the minister clearly did not have and could not obtain quickly enough to matter. The letter to Tyne, the DML liaison from the guardianship hearing, who had taken Harry's folder home and read it, whose card had arrived afterward with a brief note that said simply if anything develops, write directly, asked whether the welfare letter constituted potential obstruction of the ongoing MLE inquiry and whether an inquiry into its origins was warranted. 2 letters. He sent them both. Then he wrote a third letter, which he did not send via the Ollery. He went to McGonagall's office and gave it to her and said, "Can you give this to the headmaster? Personally." She looked at the sealed letter. "What does it say?" "That I know what he did Tuesday," Harry said. "That I understand he's trying to recalibrate his position. That I'm not going to pretend the last 10 years didn't happen because he's being helpful now. And that if he genuinely wants to find a way to be useful going forward, the most useful thing he can do is cooperate fully with the MLE investigation and stop managing the situation." He paused. "And that I'm willing to have that conversation in person, on my terms, when I choose to have it. Not before." McGonagall held the letter for a moment. "That's a very direct message." "Yes," Harry said. She put it in her robe pocket. "I'll give it to him." Bones' response arrived 3 hours later. The MLE had formally notified the minister's office that the welfare power invocation was procedurally defective in the presence of an active protective order. The notification cited 4 specific statutes. It required the minister's office to withdraw the proposal within 24 hours or face a formal procedural challenge before the Wisengamot. Tyne's response arrived 4 hours after that. The welfare letter was being examined as a potential attempt to obstruct the ongoing inquiry. No formal accusation had been made, but the examination had been opened and the minister's office had been notified. This was not, as legal instruments went, equivalent to being charged with anything. But it was a very public and very official way of saying, "We are watching, and we know what you tried." The withdrawal came by dinner. Harry was eating roast beef, roast potatoes, the full weight of a cold October evening warranting something substantial, when a ministry owl landed in front of him, deposited an envelope, and departed. The envelope contained a single page from the minister's office stating that the welfare proposal had been withdrawn pending further review of the applicable statutory framework. Ron, beside him, watched Harry read it. "Good news," he said, which had become his standard opener for Harry's owl-delivered documents. "The intervention attempt has been withdrawn," Harry said. "Brilliant," Ron said, and went back to his roast beef with the comfortable satisfaction of someone who had learned to trust the process. Hermione, across the table, said nothing, but she caught Harry's eye and nodded once, precisely, with the expression of someone who has watched a complex piece of work arrive at its correct conclusion and finds this professionally satisfying. He ate his roast beef. Around him Gryffindor table was its usual Friday evening self, loud and warm and full of the overlapping conversations of people who had made it to the end of the week and were pleased about it. The twins were conducting a parallel narrative about someone in Hufflepuff's encounter with a rogue Niffler that was getting more elaborate with each telling. Neville was across from Harry, working through a second helping of everything, and he looked up at one point and said, without preamble, "My Gran heard from Tyne. He called on her Tuesday." Harry looked at him. "For the statement?" "For the statement." Neville's expression was the quietly resolute one he'd been wearing more often lately, the one that fit his face better than the anxious expression it had replaced. She gave him everything. The date, the wording as best she remembered it. The context of the 3 visits Dumbledore made before, he paused. "Before my parents." He looked at his plate. She said it felt like putting something down that she'd been holding in both hands. Said she slept properly for the first time in years. Harry felt the weight of that. Not his weight, Augusta Longbottom's, carried for 9 years, now in someone else's hands where it belonged. "Good," he said. "That's good." She also said, Neville continued, with a slight shift in tone that meant something else was coming, that you should know Dumbledore visited St. Mungo's in September. "To see my parents." "After the filing?" 10 days after, Neville said. "Gran found out through a healer friend. He was there for 40 minutes. There are no notes from the visit on record." His jaw was set in the way it got when he was being deliberate. "I thought you should know." Harry thought about this. Dumbledore visiting Frank and Alice Longbottom, who could not speak and could not testify, 10 days after a legal filing that mentioned them. The absence of notes. The 40 minutes. "I'll write to Tyne," Harry said. "Already have," Neville said, and went back to his roast beef. Harry looked at him across the table, at Neville Longbottom, who had come to Hogwarts expecting to be frightened of everything and had decided, somewhere along the line, to be something else instead, and thought about the specific quality of people who had been shaped by loss and emerged from it not diminished but differently formed, harder in the places that needed to be hard and softer nowhere they didn't choose. "You'd have made a good Hufflepuff," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "The hat did say that." "How did you talk it out of it?" "Told it my Gran would consider it a personal insult," Neville said, and the expression was wry and genuine and completely Neville. "She went to Gryffindor in 1959. She still has the scarf." Harry laughed, and it was a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that happened when something was genuinely funny and you weren't performing an audience. Around the table a few people glanced over with the mild curiosity of people who had noticed that Harry Potter's laugh sounded different from what they'd expected. That night, late, Harry sat alone in the common room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The fire was the only light. Outside, the October wind pressed against the windows with the insistent quality of something that wanted in. Harry had a piece of parchment in front of him and a quill in his hand, and he'd been sitting with both for 20 minutes without writing anything, which was unusual. He was thinking about Quirrell. The encounter in Babbling's classroom 3 weeks ago had sat at the back of his mind since, not forgotten, just waited. He'd decided to let it sit until he understood it better, because the worst thing you could do with a piece of information that complex was react to it before you'd properly understood it. What he understood now, Voldemort was using Quirrell the way a man uses a puppet, and Quirrell was either complicit or too far gone to resist, and the object Voldemort wanted was the Philosopher's Stone, which Harry knew was in the school because he'd put together the sequence: Gringotts Vault 713, the break-in in July, Hagrid's pickup, the third-floor corridor that all the first years had been dramatically warned away from, with the ease of someone who had good information and a working theory. He knew what was in the third-floor corridor. He'd established this through the school library's restricted section, which he'd accessed with the assistance of a note from Babbling for a runes research project that happened to also have a section on ancient magical guardianship constructs. The obstacles protecting the stone were substantial but navigable. He'd been thinking about them with the particular attention he gave to systems, the logic of each one, what it was designed to keep out, what its weaknesses were. Here was the thing that kept nagging him: Dumbledore had put the stone here. Dumbledore had arranged with Flamel to bring it to Hogwarts. Dumbledore had designed the protections. And Dumbledore was not, whatever else he was, careless. Every choice had architecture. Which meant the stone being at Hogwarts, accessible, in a building with a possessed professor, in a situation where a particular famous student was also present, was not an accident. It was a test. Not specifically for Harry. The original design was probably for Voldemort, a way to draw him into a confrontation at a place of Dumbledore's choosing. But with Harry here, with what Harry had appended, with the particular situation that now existed, the test had acquired layers that Dumbledore might or might not be aware of. Harry picked up his quill and wrote, not a letter this time, but a list. What Voldemort wants. What Quirrell needs to get it. What the protections are. What happens if the stone is taken. What happens if it's not. What the outcomes look like from various positions. He wrote until the list was a network, connecting points to points, possibilities to possibilities, outcomes to outcomes. He was not trying to solve the problem tonight. He was trying to map it, the same way he'd mapped the legal situation in October, not reacting to each individual threat but understanding the whole system, because systems had pressure points and you couldn't find pressure points without seeing the whole thing. When he finished he sat with the map and thought about the fact that he was 11 years old and it was midnight and he was sitting in a common room planning for a confrontation with an entity that had murdered his parents, and this should probably feel more frightening than it did. It didn't feel frightening. It felt like a problem with a shape, and problems with shapes could be addressed. He was not going to do it alone, which was not the same as not being able to do it alone. The distinction mattered. Doing things alone when you had people who wanted to help was not strength, it was stubbornness, and Harry had been stubbornly alone his entire life and had decided in October that he was done with that particular habit. He folded the map and put it in his bag. He banked the fire and went upstairs and lay in his bed and listened to the castle breathe, and the castle breathed back, and the October wind went on pressing at the windows from the outside, and inside, in the warm stone of a 1,000-year-old building with 4 people's primal magic in its foundations, Harry Potter stared at the canopy of his bed and thought about all the pieces on all the boards and about the fact that he could see them now. All of them, and none of them were where anyone thought they were. He was several moves ahead. He intended to stay that way. Chapter 6, Unchosen. November came in hard. The first proper frost arrived on a Tuesday, turning the Hogwarts grounds silver overnight, and the lake developed a thin, translucent edge that wasn't quite ice but was making its intentions clear. The mountains had gone from red to gray. The castle ran cold in the mornings and warm by midday, and the temperature difference between floors was significant enough that older students had strong opinions about which corridors to take to class. Harry had been watching Quirrell every day since October. Not obviously, not the way that draws attention, not the amateur surveillance of someone who doesn't know they're being observed in return. He watched the way he watched everything now, with the peripheral quality of the anchoring state, present and aware without directing it. What he'd been observing was a deterioration. Quirrell had started the term slightly wrong and was now significantly wrong, thinner, grayer, moving with the effortful deliberateness of someone whose body was being used by 2 things at once and neither of them particularly carefully. The turban had become a constant. In Potions one Thursday, Harry had caught a reflection of the back of Quirrell's head in a copper pot and seen, for a fraction of a second, the shape of a face that was not Quirrell's pressed against the fabric. He'd said nothing. He'd noted it. What he'd also been watching was Snape watching Quirrell, which was more interesting. Snape kept a very particular quality of attention on the defense professor, not subtle, because Snape was not a man built for subtle, but targeted, and Harry, who had been observing Snape since the first week, could read the texture of it. Snape was worried. Not the manufactured worry of a performance, but the real kind, the kind that made a man's jaw go tight when he thought no one was looking. Harry came to Snape's office on a Wednesday evening and knocked. The door opened. Snape looked at him with the expression he now reserved specifically for Harry, which was a kind of careful, assessing attention that had replaced the contempt it had started as, not warmth, not friendship, but the specific regard of a man who had decided someone was worth taking seriously and was still slightly irritated about it. "Quirrell is moving faster," Harry said. Snape stepped back from the door. Harry came in. He didn't wait to be invited to sit, he'd stopped waiting for that in their third conversation, and Snape had stopped pretending it was a problem in their fourth. "I've noticed," Snape said. "The stone isn't safe where it is," Harry said. "Not from someone already inside the building with a direct connection to Voldemort." Snape's expression didn't change at the name. He'd stopped flinching at it around the same time he'd stopped pretending he found Harry's presence in his office surprising. "The protections are excellent against an outside intrusion," Harry said. "They weren't designed for this specific scenario. Fluffy is a problem you solve once. The Devil's Snare, the keys, the chess set, the troll, the potions, they're linear. Sequential. Someone who knows what they are and has enough time and ability moves through them." He paused. "Which means Quirrell, directed by someone who can read all of them, gets through." Snape looked at him steadily. "What do you propose?" "I want to know if Flamel has been contacted about moving the stone," Harry said. "And I want to know what Dumbledore's actual plan is for when Quirrell makes the attempt." "You think there is a plan," Snape said. "There's always a plan," Harry said. "The question is whose benefit it's designed for." He held Snape's gaze. "What's the plan?" The silence stretched. In it, Harry could hear the dungeons doing their low, deep thing, cold and stone and the particular resonance of a space that had been lived in for centuries by people who kept significant secrets. "The plan," Snape said, with the careful diction of a man choosing whether to say something and having chosen, was that the stone would draw Voldemort into a direct attempt. That the attempt would fail, the final obstacle is designed for that, and that Voldemort, failing, would be weakened further. The Mirror of Erised shows only the person who wants to find the stone but not use it. It was designed to be passed by someone who wanted to protect the stone, not possess it. "Which is elegant," Harry said. "As long as the person who reaches the mirror has the right motivation." "Yes. And if Quirrell reaches it instead, a man who very much wants to possess the stone because the thing inside him very much needs it, the design fails." "Yes," Snape said again, more quietly. "So the plan works if the right person reaches the stone first," Harry said. Snape looked at him. The candlelight caught the planes of his face and made them sharper. "The plan," he said, "originally assumed a particular person would reach the stone first. A particular person who could be trusted to want to protect it and not possess it. A particular person who had been prepared for exactly this kind of moment." "Me," Harry said. "You." Harry sat with this for a moment. The preparation. The potions. The whole elaborate architecture of 10 years of conditioning, ending in a boy who walked into danger instinctively, protectively, without questioning it, because the questioning impulse had been carefully removed. A boy who would reach the mirror and see himself finding the stone but not using it, because a compliant, loyal, obedient boy who had been shaped from infancy to be a hero would want nothing for himself at all. "He needed me unquestioning," Harry said. "He needed you willing," Snape said. "Willing to walk into what amounts to a trap, for the right reasons, and not walk out." He stopped. Breathed through his nose. The stone was never the point. The stone was the lure. The confrontation with Voldemort at the mirror was the point. Except the confrontation was not designed to have two survivors. The candles burned. Outside, the dungeon corridor was silent. "The prophecy," Harry said. "The part about neither can live while the other survives." He read it as meaning one of you has to kill the other. But there's a piece of Voldemort in Quirrell right now, and a piece he'd worked this out in October, turning it over and over until the shape of it was clear. "There's a piece in me." Snape went completely still. "The scar," Harry said. "The night my parents died. He tried to kill me and it bounced back. The killing curse doesn't do that. The only thing that could redirect a killing curse is my mother's sacrifice, which created a protection powerful enough to send it back, but the moment of redirection, when the curse found no purchase, it left something. A fragment. Legilimency traces, I think, I can feel him when he's close, feel what he feels when he's focused on something. It's getting stronger as he gets stronger. He looked at Snape. You knew about this too. It was not a question. Snape exhaled. It was the quietest sound Harry had heard from him. I suspected, he said. I had no confirmation. So Dumbledore's real plan, Harry said, required me to reach the mirror, confront Voldemort directly, and in that confrontation, with no preparation, no knowledge, no armor except the conditioning the potions were supposed to provide, trigger the second fulfillment of the prophecy. He paused. He needed me to die with it. The silence this time was very long and very specific. He didn't necessarily intend for the dying to be permanent, Snape said, in the tone of someone who knows this doesn't help. The Horcrux, if my suspicion is correct, if there is a fragment in you, then Voldemort could not be permanently killed while it exists. The plan as I understand it anticipated that you would survive the initial confrontation, carry the fragment, and eventually, he stopped. Eventually be the final Horcrux, Harry said. Eventually die in the final confrontation to destroy the peace in me. Yes. And this was the thing the potions were designed to make me willing to do, Harry said. Walk into my own death. For the cause. Without questioning. Yes, Snape said, very quietly. Harry nodded. Once, precisely, like closing a book at the end of a chapter. Right, he said. Here's what's going to happen instead. He told Hermione and Ron and Neville that night. Not all of it, not the Horcrux theory, which was too significant to say casually by firelight, which needed to be handled carefully because it was going to have to be handled professionally and not just personally. But the stone, the protections, Quirrell's trajectory, the timeline he believed they were working with. He told them clearly and completely and without softening any of it. They listened. Ron's face did several things in sequence. Hermione's went still in the way it went still when she was reorganizing her understanding of a large amount of information. Neville watched Harry the whole way through with the quiet attention he'd had since October, the attention of someone who had decided to follow and was making sure he understood the terrain. When? Ron said, when Harry finished. Before Christmas. Quirrell is getting worse every week. He'll move when he thinks the opportunity is right, probably during a disruption of some kind. Something that draws attention elsewhere. He looked at them. I'm going in before he does. We're going in, Hermione said. Hermione, that's not a discussion, she said, with the particular finality that her voice acquired when she'd made a decision and was aware that it was correct. I know the devil's snare and I know the potion's logic and I'm quite good at chess, actually, I'm better at chess, Ron said. You are, Hermione conceded, with the grace of someone who found accurate concession easier than most people. The point is, 3 of us are better than one of you alone, and that has nothing to do with your ability and everything to do with the logic of the situation. Harry looked at Neville. Neville said, I'll stay on this side of the trapdoor. Watch what comes from behind. He met Harry's eyes. Someone should know where you are. Good, Harry said. That's what I was going to ask. They went on a Thursday evening in the second week of November. Harry had chosen the timing carefully. Quirrell had been absent from dinner, small detail, easily missed, significant if you were watching. Snape had been at the head table with his jaw in the particular set that meant he was monitoring something. Dumbledore's chair was empty, which it sometimes was, which told you nothing by itself and something in context. Harry had written one letter that afternoon. To Madame Bones. Brief, factual, he had reason to believe the Philosopher's Stone currently held at Hogwarts was at immediate risk of theft by a compromised member of staff, that the compromising agent was Voldemort acting through Quirinus Quirrell, and that he intended to take action to protect the stone tonight. He'd included the statement reference for Snape's testimony, which established that his awareness of the Quirrell situation was legally documented, and he'd noted that this letter constituted a record that his actions were premeditated, voluntary, and taken with full awareness of the risk. He'd sent it and then gone to dinner as if it were an ordinary Thursday. The trapdoor was where he'd known it would be. Fluffy was asleep, there was music playing, a small enchanted music box left open on the floor, not Quirrell's work but someone's, and Harry filed this detail away because it was information. Someone had been here recently. The trapdoor was already unlocked. They went through. Ron held Hermione's hand on the way down, which Harry noticed and didn't mention, because it was the kind of moment that belonged to them and not to the story he was telling about tonight. The Devil's Snare recognized the light Hermione produced and retreated. The enchanted keys were a matter of speed and attention. Harry found the right one without much difficulty, moving through the flock with the Seeker's Eye that had been doing this in some form since the first practice. Ron's chess game was extraordinary. Harry had known Ron was good at chess, had played him twice and lost both times, but watching him handle the board was different, Ron in his element with the complete calm of someone whose mind worked best in this particular way. Hermione solved the potions riddle in 3 minutes. The logic was sound and she found the right vials with the precision of someone who had been working with logical structures since before she could reach library shelves. Harry took the smallest vial, the one that allowed forward passage, and looked at them both. "Go back," he said. "Take the vial marked for retreat and go back through the chess room. Get out of the school and get somewhere with a fireplace and call the MLE, Bones or Tyne, they know the situation. Tell them what I told them in the letter and that I'm down here." "Harry," Ron started. "I need you to do this," Harry said. "Not because I don't want you here. Because this part requires exactly one person, and the part that comes after requires the MLE to already know about it. The part that comes after is the important part. You two are the important part." Hermione looked at him for a moment with those clear, direct eyes. "Come back," she said. "That's the plan," he said. She nodded. Ron punched his shoulder lightly, which was Ron's version of several more complicated things, and they went back through the flames. Harry went forward. The room with the mirror was exactly as he'd imagined it, which was not a comforting thing about his imagination. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror with his back to the door and his hands moving in a pattern that was half prayer and half incantation, and the mirror's surface was moving, rippling, like water, showing something Harry couldn't see from this angle, and Quirrell was making a sound that was not quite speech and not quite anything else. Harry stepped into the room. Quirrell turned. In the candlelight, he looked worse than he had at dinner, waxy, drawn tight, the skin around his eyes bruised dark. The turban was slightly askew. His eyes were Quirrell's eyes, frantic and frightened and doing nothing useful, but underneath that, visible to Harry in the anchored state he'd slipped into without effort, was the other thing, the thing that was not Quirrell, looking through Quirrell's face with a cold, precise intelligence. "Potter," Quirrell said, and the stutter was entirely gone. "You can't get it from the mirror," Harry said. "You want to use it. The mirror doesn't give it to people who want to use it." He crossed the room at a measured pace and stood beside Quirrell, looking at the mirror. "It was designed for me, actually. Or someone like me. Someone who wants to find it but not possess it." He looked at his reflection. In the mirror, his reflection reached into a pocket and took out a stone, red, heavy, real, and held it up, and Harry felt the weight of it in his actual pocket before he fully processed that the weight was there. He looked down. He slid his hand into his pocket. His fingers closed around the stone. The mirror had given it to him directly, which he hadn't expected, and the warmth of it against his palm was extraordinary, not the warmth of temperature, but the warmth of something that was genuinely, densely alive with a particular kind of magic that was old in the same way the castle was old. He closed his hand around it and turned away from the mirror. Quirrell was watching him with both faces at once. "Give it to me," said the voice that was not Quirrell's. "No," Harry said. In the candlelight, something shifted. The quality of presence in the room changed, the way atmosphere changes before something significant, the air thickening with the particular pressure of will against will. Harry felt it as pressure against the anchoring state, pressure against the castle's awareness that was in him and around him and which, here, this deep in the building, was densely present. "You are a remarkable boy," said the voice, and it meant this with a precision that had nothing kind in it. "More remarkable than I understood when I tried to kill you." "I know," Harry said. "You have been lied to." "I know that too. By people who called it love." A pause. "I never called it love. I called it what it was. Power, and the willingness to use it." Another pause. "You and I have more in common than Dumbledore's version of your story allows." Harry looked at the turban. At the shape behind it. At the thing that had killed his parents and had spent the last 10 years as a fragment, a remnant, a sliver of what it used to be, clinging to existence through the bodies of others. He thought about what the hat had said about the prophecy being a trap built from belief, and about what happened when you stopped believing in the trap's framework. "We don't have that much in common," Harry said. "You're afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of you." The pressure intensified. Harry felt it against his primal magic the way you feel current against your hand in a river, present, forceful, real, but not unmanageable because the river was not stronger than the thing he was standing on. "Fear is wisdom," the voice said. "Fear is useful sometimes," Harry corrected. "Right now it would just slow me down." Quirrell lunged. Harry moved, not away, but sideways and forward, the reflex of someone who had spent 5 weeks developing a relationship with space and movement that went deeper than physical training. Quirrell's hands caught his arm and Harry felt the burn instantly, felt the contact produce something like fire at the point of connection, and he heard Quirrell cry out, not the voice, Quirrell himself, in pain, and the pain was coming from his own hands. The immunity. His mother's blood and his primal magic and the protection she'd written into him with the most fundamental act of will anyone could make, it didn't just block compulsion. It was, at its core, a rejection of anything imposed against his nature. Voldemort's magic pressing against him from outside had the same fundamental incompatibility as 500 love potions had. It found nowhere to grip. He didn't let go of Quirrell's wrist. He held it. The burn spread across Quirrell's skin from the contact point, moving up his arm, and Quirrell was screaming now, both of them, the two voices in terrible discord, and the chamber filled with the sound and the smell of something burning that was not Quirrell's flesh but Voldemort's presence, the fragment in Quirrell's body finding its host intolerable under the pressure of contact with Harry. "Stop," said the voice from the back of the turban. "Let go." In a moment, Harry said, through the effort of holding, because it was effort, the burn was moving toward his hands now, the backlash of two opposing magics occupying the same space, but it was manageable effort, and management was the key, and he was not going to drop it until he was certain. He felt the fragment detach. It was not a dramatic event in the way of stories. It was the sudden absence of weight, not physical weight but the particular weight of a significant malevolence in close proximity, and Quirrell's body went slack and Harry released him and stepped back. Quirrell collapsed. Just collapsed, like a puppet with its strings cut, folding onto the floor in a heap that was still breathing but barely, and the breathing had the quality of something settling rather than something active. The shadow above the mirror, dark and formless and there in the way that things are there when they aren't physical but are nonetheless real, turned toward Harry. "This isn't finished," it said. "I know," Harry said. "You can't destroy me this way. I know that too. I'm not trying to destroy you tonight." He looked at the shadow directly, with the same complete lack of fear he'd brought to every other part of this conversation. "I'm telling you that you can't have the stone. And you can't have me. And whatever version of this you and Dumbledore planned, neither version involves me anymore." He held the shadow's attention with his own, across the cold chamber, two things that had been opposed since before he could remember. "Go find somewhere else to exist. When you come back properly, and I think you will, come back properly. Not like this. Not through someone else's body. It's undignified and it's not going to work. The shadow was very still. "You're telling me," it said, slowly, "to come back stronger." "I'm telling you to stop sneaking," Harry said. "Because this," he gestured at Quirrell's collapsed form, "is what sneaking looks like when it fails. And it's going to keep failing against me, specifically, as long as you're doing it this way." He paused. "That's information, not a threat." Another long silence. In it the candles burned and the mirror reflected nothing, and Quirrell breathed in shallow increments on the floor. Then the shadow moved, not toward him but upward, through the ceiling, through the stones of the castle, dispersing into the November air above Hogwarts, and it was gone, and the room was empty except for Harry and Quirrell and the mirror and the stone in Harry's fist. He stood alone in the chamber for a moment, which was the first moment he'd had alone since this started. He looked at the stone. He thought about Nicholas Flamel, who was 600 years old, and about the elixir of life, and about what it meant to make something that kept you alive indefinitely, and about what it meant to protect that thing, and about what it meant to have that thing in your hand and feel no desire to possess it whatsoever, only the desire to put it somewhere safe. He put it in his pocket. He went over to Quirrell and checked his pulse, present, weak, but present, and conjured a basic warming charm around him, because whatever Quirrell was and whatever he'd done, he was also a person whose body had been used by something that had now left it, and the leaving had not been gentle, and he was cold on the stone floor. Then Harry went back through the flames, through the potions room, through the chess room, through the devil's snare, back up through the trapdoor, and emerged into the third-floor corridor to find the entire school, approximately, waiting. Not literally the entire school. But the corridor held McGonagall and Dumbledore and Snape and 4 members of the MLE including Tyne, and Hermione, and Ron at the back of the group with expressions of concentrated worry that relaxed precisely and visibly when Harry came up through the trapdoor. Harry stood up and dusted his knees and looked at the assembled faces and held out the stone. "Quirrell's down there," he said. "He needs medical attention. Voldemort's fragment has left his body and the departure was rough. Someone should get him." He looked at Tyne. "Voldemort is gone for now. Not permanently. The stone is uncompromised." Tyne looked at Harry for a moment. Then he looked at the stone. Then he looked at the 2 MLE officers beside him and said, "Get Quirrell," and they went. Dumbledore had not moved. He was standing at the edge of the group with his hands behind his back, and his face was— Harry looked at it and understood that this was a man watching the conclusion of an event he had planned in one way and was witnessing in another, and that whatever he was feeling about that was large enough that not even his considerable skill at composure was fully containing it. Harry crossed the corridor and held out the stone. "You should return this to Flamel," Harry said. "And when you do, I'd suggest being honest with him about what happened tonight. He's 600 years old. He'll understand." Dumbledore took the stone from Harry's hand. He closed his fingers around it and looked at Harry in the torchlight with those blue eyes that were never just warm and never just calculating but always both, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Dumbledore said, quietly, "You told him to come back." "I told him to stop sneaking," Harry said. "It's different." "Is it? You wanted a confrontation where I walked in unprepared and unaware and died at the right moment," Harry said, in the same even tone he'd used in Dumbledore's office a month ago. "I walked in prepared and aware and came back out. The confrontation happened. The outcome was different because I had actual information." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "That's what you would have had from the beginning if you'd chosen it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The corridor was very quiet. Everyone else had the specific stillness of people who were present for something they understood was significant and were trying to leave room for it. "I know," Dumbledore said, at last. "I know you know," Harry said. "What I need to know is what you do with the knowing." Another pause. Then Dumbledore said, with the careful precision of a man choosing a new register, "Cooperate fully with the investigation. Provide testimony. No management of the process." He paused. "Those were your terms." "They were," Harry said. "I agree to them." He said it without performance. without the warm framing or the gentle management or any of the many layers he usually operated through. Just simply, plainly, as a statement of intention. I have been wrong in ways that cannot be reduced to good intentions. No, Harry agreed. They can't. What I have done, Dumbledore said, to you, specifically, is in the record, Harry said. Let the process handle it. That's what the process is for. He paused. I'm not offering forgiveness tonight. I'm not offering condemnation either. I'm offering a next step, and what comes after the next step depends on what you do with it. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, with the specific quality of someone accepting terms that are fair and more generous than deserved. Harry looked at McGonagall. Can someone get Madame Pomfrey? Quirrell is going to need, already sent for, McGonagall said, and her voice had the slight thickness of someone who had been holding something together and was allowing herself to partially release it now that the need was less acute. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. Ron was wearing the expression of someone who had been very worried and had now decided to cover this with aggressive normality. So, Ron said, all good then. All good, Harry said. Right. Ron looked at the trapdoor. You went down there without the invisibility cloak you definitely don't have, against you-know-who, at 11 years old, and what you came back to tell us is all good. Pretty much, Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Some communication passed between them that was efficient and private and only possible between people who had known each other for long enough that the vocabulary had compressed. Brilliant, Ron said, which covered everything he meant. The aftermath was not neat, because nothing real was neat. The investigation accelerated through November and December with the momentum of something that had been building for months. Snape's testimony was filed, revised to include the events in the chamber, and accepted by the MLE as a primary account. Pomfrey's diagnostic findings, now supplemented by Merithott's assessment, formed the medical core of the proceedings. The Gringotts audit produced 2 secondary investigations, one into the Edinburgh laboratory, which produced its own chain of documentation, and one into the specific commissioning records for the experimental compounds, which led back through 3 intermediaries to a single origin point that was now formally documented in the MLE record. Dumbledore was not arrested. Harry hadn't expected him to be arrested, not yet. The evidentiary process moved at its own pace and the case was complicated enough that a clean conclusion was months away at minimum. But his formal status was altered, his guardianship authorization remained suspended, and he had agreed under the terms Harry had stated in the corridor to cooperate fully. He did cooperate fully. Harry watched this happen and gave it credit where it was due. Full cooperation, when you were Albus Dumbledore, was a genuinely costly thing, and he did it without performing martyrdom, which was perhaps the most honest thing Harry had ever seen from him. The Board of Governors commissioned an independent review of Hogwarts administration. The review would take a year and produce recommendations. Harry had no expectation that it would fix everything. He had an expectation that it would fix some things, and that fixing some things while building the capacity to fix others was how actual change worked, rather than a single dramatic moment that resolved everything at once. He had decided to stop wanting a single dramatic moment. They were satisfying in stories and inefficient in practice. Quirrell survived. He was in St. Mungo's through December, recovering from what was officially described as severe magical depletion due to extended parasitic enchantment, which was accurate if incomplete. He had no memory of the last 3 months. The fragment of Voldemort had taken them with it. He was, as far as anyone could tell, genuinely a victim, and he was treated as one. Augusta Longbottom's statement was formally entered into the investigation record in late November. She came to Hogwarts to deliver it in person, which had not been required and which she had chosen to do, and Neville met her in the entrance hall and they stood there together for a moment that Harry happened to witness from the staircase above, an old woman and her grandson, the specific gravity of people who had carried something heavy for a long time and were setting it down in the right place. Augusta Longbottom was a formidable person who wore a very specific kind of armor that Harry recognized as the armor of people who had been through genuine loss and had decided, carefully and deliberately, not to let the loss take anything more than it had already taken. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs on her way back out and looked up at Harry with sharp eyes and a strong face. "Your mother," she said, "was one of the finest people I knew. And your father, for all his faults, loved her completely. Whatever they managed to put into you, it survived." "I know," Harry said. "Good," she said, with crisp approval, and left. Neville stood at the door watching her go and then looked up at Harry with the complicated expression of someone who had just watched the person they loved most in the world do something brave, and was feeling the pride and the cost of it simultaneously. "She cried in the carriage on the way here," Neville said. "She told me before she got out. She said she wanted me to know she'd been afraid and that she'd done it anyway." "That's what brave is," Harry said. Neville nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I'm starting to understand that." December brought snow and the end of term and the particular quality of a school winding down, everyone's attention simultaneously on the holidays and the memory of what had happened in November. The stone was with Flamel. Dumbledore had travelled to France in the first week of December and returned without it. He had also, Harry knew from a brief note from Tyne, told Flamel the full circumstances of its time at Hogwarts, including the events of November. Flamel's response had been, according to Tyne, not anger but something more considered, the response of someone very old who had seen a great many things and was adding this to the catalogue. Harry received a letter from Flamel in December. It was short and written in an old-fashioned hand on very good paper. "Mr. Potter, I have been told of what occurred. I am also told that you held the stone and chose not to keep it. I want you to know that the choice matters. Not because it was difficult for you, I suspect it was not, but because it was made clearly, without drama, as a simple expression of what you are. That is rarer than the ability itself. Perenelle sends her regards. We are well. Perhaps we will meet properly, someday." N.F. Harry read it twice and put it with the rest of his things. He was in the common room on the last evening before the holidays, the fire high and the room empty of most people. Most had already gone home, Ron among them with an invitation for Harry to come for Christmas that Harry had accepted with the plain, uncomplicated gratitude of someone who had never had a real Christmas and was not going to pretend that wasn't a significant thing. Hermione was upstairs finishing her packing. Neville had left that morning with Augusta and had said goodbye to Harry the way you said goodbye to someone you intended to see again soon, which was different from the way he'd said everything before, which had always had a slight quality of not being certain about the continuation. Harry sat alone with the fire and thought about the year. Not a summary, he didn't reduce things to summaries, because summaries lost the texture and the texture was where you actually learn things. He thought about specific moments. The sorting. The compound list. The anchoring state, and the first time the castle had felt alive under his feet. Babbling's classroom in the early mornings. Merithott's precise, matter-of-fact assessment. Neville in the corridor saying I'm in. Hermione handing him a book at midnight. Ron lending him his good quill without asking why. Snape writing I made it in cramped angular handwriting and signing it with nothing. He thought about his mother's paper. About the voice that came through the academic language, dry and certain and interested. About a 17-year-old who had found something unusual in herself and written it down and published it because it was true and true things deserved to be documented. He thought about Dumbledore, and held the complexity of that with the same even attention he'd brought to everything else. A man who had loved him in the way that people love useful things, genuinely, and wrongly, and with the specific blindness of those who have always believed they know best. A man who was now, with the slow and costly difficulty of it, doing something different. Harry didn't know how that ended. He didn't need to know tonight. He thought about Voldemort. The shadow above the mirror, dispersing upward through stone and air. Come back properly, he'd said, which was not a welcome and was not a surrender. It was an acknowledgement of what was actually true, that Voldemort was going to come back, that the fragment in Harry's scar was its own problem that would need to be addressed, that the prophecy's mechanism, whatever shape it actually took, was not going to resolve itself on someone else's timeline just because Harry had dismantled the framework around it. There would be more to do. He was fine with that. The fire burned. Outside, the first snow of December was coming down soft and thick, landing on the lake and the grounds and the roof of the Ollery where an owl he hadn't written to yet was sitting, waiting for the next letter, waiting for the next piece of work that needed doing. The mountains were invisible in the dark and the snow. Harry picked up the Foundational Magic Survey, still on the table where he'd left it 3 weeks ago, spine broken at Chapter 7, and opened it, not to Chapter 7 but to the appendix, which he hadn't read yet, which contained the documented accounts of the 12 known primal magic practitioners the authors had confirmed across 1,000 years of records. Lily Potter was the 12th. He turned to the entry. 2 paragraphs, supplemented with the footnote about the paper he'd read 4 times. The second paragraph described her magical profile in the clipped, precise language of academic assessment and used the phrase foundational integration at the highest recorded level and the phrase remarkable breadth of natural application, and then, in the last sentence, a phrase that Harry read and sat with for a long time in the firelight, it is the assessment of this study that L. Potter represents the fullest expression of primal magic capability in the modern era, with the possible exception of her son, whose profile, if our preliminary assessment of early accidental magic records is correct, surpasses even her considerable benchmark by a significant and as yet unmeasured degree. Harry read it again. Then he closed the book. The fire crackled. The snow fell outside. The castle breathed around him with the comfortable, ancient, inhabited quality of a place that had absorbed a great deal of living and had room for more. He was 11 years old. He had primal magic in his bones and his mother's immunity in his blood and a case in progress and allies he had chosen and who had chosen him in a world that was going to require significant work and the specific equanimity of someone who understood that significant work was not a burden but a direction. He thought about the ceiling on the first night, the enchanted sky, candles floating, stars beyond them, and the belonging feeling that the hat had confirmed was real, was his, had always been his. Nothing given, nothing engineered, nothing planted. Just the plain, native fact of a person walking into the right place and recognizing it. He intended to earn it. Properly. On his own terms. He put the book down and looked at the fire for a while. Then he took out a new piece of parchment and his quill and wrote a letter to Ron's mum asking what he could bring for Christmas and whether she needed anything, because he had, for the first time in his life, the means to bring something, and he intended to use it. He sealed the letter. He went to the Ollery through the quiet, snow-hushed corridors of Hogwarts, the castle warm and awake around him, and he sent it into the December dark. He walked back slowly, taking the long way, the way he'd been learning since September, the routes the castle preferred, the staircases that were most reliably going the direction you wanted, the corridors that were warmest at night, the specific quality of silence that the stones made at midnight when the school was almost empty and the building was most itself. He climbed the stairs to Gryffindor Tower and went through the portrait hole and sat in his chair by the banked fire and breathed. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something that had been unchosen for a very long time was, at last, entirely and irrevocably its own.